Committee Room 21. Signed. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.
Good morning and welcome to the Infrastructure Committee this morning. I'd like to welcome members to the meeting. I would like to also just welcome anyone in the public gallery. I'll give a quick review of what we're going to be considering today, and then we'll go into the actual agenda. So today the committee will receive oral evidence from Cycling UK and the Department for Infrastructure on the Active Travel Delivery Plan. We will consider written evidence from stakeholders on the draft budget for 26 to 30 and consider two proposals, SL1s, for statutory rules that are subject to Assembly procedure and one that is not. Just for those in the public gallery, you can use mobile devices, but as usual, no recordings or photographs are to be taken. And if members are content, I will take us through the agenda. Are members aware of any apologies? Okay, I know some members are still trying to get in, and some might join online, and Militia is already online. Just to remind members of declarations of interest, most members have already declared their interest. If something comes up that's specific, then you can also declare an interest at that time. In terms of Chair's business, you will note, and there was some discussion about that earlier on in the week, there's tabled at page 3, there's the FOI regarding Egyptian Arch in Newry. We may have some discussion on that, but I don't want to take it now. I prefer to take that later if we can, as the Minister has also replied to us, and that's in the core. I also just want to seek committee's opinion on a joint committee meeting with the DAERA committee, which would be concurrent regarding Northern Ireland Water's role in Lough Neagh and the Lough Neagh Action Plan. I have coordinated, Michael's coordinated with the DAERA clerk, I've coordinated with the DAERA chair. Certainly, I think there is a level of willingness on my part and on Robbie's part to have the meeting. It's up to this committee as to whether that proceeds. It's a committee decision, but I'm just putting it out there to see what the committee's view on a concurrent meeting with the DAERA committee, if we can set that up at some point in the future. So, gentlemen.
I'm content. We've had them before, Chair.
Yes.
They were quite productive on A5 and other important issues, so I'm content with that, yeah.
Okay.
Also content, Chair, yeah, very much so. Sooner the better.
I totally, yeah, very content to say that do obviously NI wastewater and environmental issues do cross over, so I think there'll be no problem. In fact, it'll probably be more than welcome.
Yeah. Militia, are you happy enough with that?
Yeah, I'm happy enough with that too, Chair, yeah.
Okay. Michael, you'll take that away and work your magic.
Consult with the agriculture clerk.
Yep. Relevant authorities.
Relevant authorities.
Okay, that's fine. So landing that might be the challenge rather than actually just agreeing it at this committee, given a whole range of diary scheduling and other committees that these members serve on. But we'll take that away. We will keep members informed regarding progress. That's Chair's business. We have draft minutes, and they are at page 7 of your pack of the meeting on the 11th of February, which apparently was an absolutely superb meeting with an incredible chair. Needless to say, that incredible chair was not me, but was the deputy chair. At that point, I declared I was sick last week, and I want to stick in the record my thanks to John for taking that on at relatively short notice, and obviously feedback was he's way better than I am, but I'm afraid you're stuck with me for a while, probably until Deborah comes back. So if members are happy enough, I will sign the minutes. Are members happy?
Chair, thank you.
Content, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay, so matters arising from that meeting, which I wasn't at, but at page 18, we have the clerk's memo. It was oral evidence from Environment Leak, the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force, RSPB, and Woodland Trust. And I just need on that one to seek committee agreement to forward these issues to the department for their response. Enough. And also then just again on matters arising, just to remind members that the committee asked the clerk to engage with the Youth Assembly on GDL, or Graduated Driver's Licensing. And I need to seek committee agreement to schedule an oral evidence session, which I think will be very interesting given the amount of interest in this particular area, with the Youth Assembly at a future suitable date. Do I have committee agreement to do that?
Great.
Okay. And then we move on to correspondence, and the core memo is at page 25. And the what I will do is, as usual, I'll just take members through stuff that my view is that we need to discuss, and then I will take anything else that members wish to raise or discuss just at the end, and anything that's left we will choose to note. So the first thing is the correspondence that we have received back from the Minister on Egyptian Arch. Members will be aware that there has been a private members motion on this. There has been two urgent oral questions. I also just have to mention to members that the Minister will be attending committee next week. And just to also point members to the FOI response that I received, which is in table papers, which I promised the committee I would share when I received it, and I did, and it's there. Before I make any comments around it, Andrew, you look bored already. I'll open it to the floor. If anyone has any comments they want to make on the core that we've got back. Okay. I have one comment on it, let's see. And it's I'm not sure, it looks like page maybe 42. I'll take you to it. It's a letter from the previous minister, John O'Dowd, who predates the current one, and it's to David Taylor, who must be a councillor in Newry, Mourne and Down. It's second paragraph, and it just says, my officials have contacted those responsible for erecting the billboard and asked them to remove it. And that core is dated the 16th of April 2024. I'm therefore assuming that, given the timescales of the correspondence that was revealed in the FOI to me, which was from memory, core around 2023 when there was no minister in place, 3 letters in November of 25 when there was the current minister in place, that the billboard hasn't been removed. However, the minister, John O'Dowd, did ask, obviously knew who put it up, and asked whoever put it up to remove it. Following on from that, I would like to know, and we can ask the department this, who did the minister write to, or who did his officials write to ask for it to be removed? I suspect we might all know the answer to that, depending on our view on the subject area, but clearly it hasn't been removed. And there's a wee bit of verbal dancing around what is a billboard and when is it not a billboard. Clearly there is still a billboard there, it just doesn't have any advertising on it anymore, or any political slogans. But I don't think this has quite run its course yet in terms of some of the verbal dancing we've seen around it. It's not by a country mile an issue that warrants continued committee discussion around it, because we have big issues that this committee has to sort out and give views on. However, it is my view that there has been a little bit of obfuscation around this, and I would still like to get to the bottom of that. So, Justin, who's joining online. Justin.
Sure, thank you. Listen, I think the correspondence back from the Minister probably presents more questions than answers. Obviously, we've sent her a series of questions, all of which have not been answered. Major contradictions. It's farce, actually. With one minister saying it's not a billboard, another minister saying it is a billboard, and it's a Sinn Féin billboard, and one minister saying the billboard's now gone. When I'm driving past the billboard this morning, it's still there in plain sight. So there's so many contradictions and areas for challenge. And I think maybe we're just best posing them to the minister next week.
That's fine, Justin. No issue with that. We will get some time. How long do we have with the minister, Michael, next week?
An hour and a half.
An hour and a half. Okay. So, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, you sort of passed remark, and my poker face here maybe isn't the best read.
Is that a poker face, Andrew?
No, it's not.
Play poker?
Slightly, not so much bored, but I suppose. Well, I'm going to make a few points and then maybe come back with a question here. You read through it. There's no permission sought. There's, it references how there's going to be a proliferation of signs. I mean, that horse has bolted in this country for such a long time regarding stuff on infrastructure, property, etc. Responsibility rests with the owners. Maybe courts to determine liability. Mr. Taylor, Councillor Taylor, I know Mr. Councillor Taylor from the time in Urrymore and Down Council. He's a colleague of Mr. Stewart's. I mean, he seems to be the only elected rep in this correspondence that has, consistently raised this. That maybe tells its own story. But again, there's 4 correspondences to Mr. Taylor. There's 4 correspondences to by, I think, the Sinn Féin reps in here. You know what I mean? I would question why, it's going to the Sinn Féin reps maybe, and not a party organisational thing. If you're not getting any response, maybe. But I mean, and again, as Mr. McNulty can attest, I've not maybe eyeballed it personally, but it is quite clear that the billboard foundation structure, which is what a billboard is, it's a structure, it's not necessarily an advertisement. Associated flagpole is still there. It's not run its course, but it doesn't merit any further committee time. I'm not really sure it does, really. And again, with the greatest respect, the minister comes down here. We've had urgent orals, we've had debates. This committee's had a certain amount of time on it too. If other members deem it the best process of their time to be asking the minister when she comes down, that's so be it. But I suppose, Chair, where do you see this ending at this stage now? Because, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we are playing semantics. Yep. It is frustrating. We're fixated on a micro issue whenever it points to wider issues within Northern Ireland as a whole.
Yep.
So I'm just curious as to where you see, with respect, Chair, where do you see this playing out in this committee?
Yeah, I'm confusing. I'll bring Militia in 1 second, but I'll answer your question. I am confused, Andrew, as to why the Department of Infrastructure haven't gone to Egyptian Arch, because they know where it is, because it's now in a GPS coordinate, with a chainsaw and taking the billboard down. I don't know why that hasn't happened, because it's up there illegally. All the Corps says that solves the issue, but that could have been done months and months ago. So that's why, and I said that last week doing media around this, I just don't know why the billboard's not taken down, because I think you'd probably agree that would solve the issue, because there's no billboard anymore and everything else is semantics. So that's what I'd like to see happen. But DFI have said it's not urgent, it's not posing a danger, so we're not going to take it down. We have to accept that at level of face value. That's more or less what the minister has said around this issue. But they could send 2 guys down and take the billboard down, and that would be problem sorted. Militia.
Chair, can you hear me?
We can indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Nice and clear.
I'd just like to make the point too that we all know that there are issues in relation to, say, advertising, billboards, flags that adorn our lampposts in different locations throughout the country, and that I know they will have to be and will be addressed in the future as well too. But this particular issue and focusing in on it all the time, I think it isn't any wonder that the general public often raise the question, just what are they doing up there in terms of wasting time over something that has been, in my own opinion, been totally exhausted in terms of our current minister and having dealt with the issue in the House only this week again. Now, I honestly do think that it's time that we moved on, and I dread the thought of, we'll say, coming into next week's meeting again too, if it's going to be a harassing session of the minister over this one particular issue. I think it's been totally and absolutely exhausted in every respect.
I mean, look, Manisha, I definitely understand where you're coming from. I don't believe that's what will happen next week because there are big issues that this committee has to question and scrutinise the minister on. I honestly, my frustration and my sense of wonderment around this is just why DFI didn't 3 or 4 months ago in November go and just get the billboard, take the billboard down, because then that would have stopped all. And you're right, there are other issues this committee wants to discuss, and they're big issues that have real impact, but they can't. I'll let Justin in first, Andrew, because he's on the schedule, and then I will take you again, Justin.
Right, this is not a matter of semantics, and it's not being exhausted purely because this is the lead party of government breaking the law. Okay, so we're all clear on that front. And it's not just about one billboard, it's about multiple billboards. And there's correspondence refers to multiple billboards around Newry City. Now, going to South Armagh, every junction, every hamlet, every village, every town has Sinn Féin illegal billboards plastered around them as if they own South Armagh. Sinn Féin do not own South Armagh. Sinn Féin do not own the land of the Egyptian North. Sinn Féin do not own Newry. Sinn Féin do not own Armagh City. The act that they do in terms of placing their advertising around all year round, they need to have their hands slapped, they need to stop, they need to adhere and abide by the law like everybody else. It's not one law for thee and also a different law for me, it's the same law for everybody else. And Sinn Féin might feel it's exhausted, but the reality is, abide by the law, then you won't have to have this issue interrogated. Now, the reason why you won't go out with a chainsaw and cut this billboard down is because it's a steel structure. It's a significant erection, and they have been challenged about this multiple times by correspondence. So the minister saying, I don't know who owns it. Why is her department sending correspondence to Sinn Féin offices and to Sinn Féin's MP, to Sinn Féin's councillors? Explain that, please. So there's multiple contradictions here. Sinn Féin put their hands up and say, listen, it's ours, we'll take it down. We'll take all the rest of the posters down in every gap of the hedge in South Armagh as well, and we'll obey by the law. Thank you very much. Job done.
Thank you, Justin. Andrew, you were certainly motioning like you'd like to come back in on it.
Well, no, just to sort of follow up, yes, to agree with Mr. McNulty's point, it is not a, we're talking about a structure with concrete foundations as far as I can tell. It's not a matter of,
okay.
It's not, but again, why is this not done wider? Again, it's alluded to in some of the correspondence, a proliferation of signs. We have a proliferation of signs. We have a proliferation of issues throughout the country when it comes to this. So, it just, that is why it's not done, is because we have turned blind eyes to this for such a long time that, how it would be impossible to sort of go in to one, even though this is the micro issue, but it is a much broader issue. And again, I've said it before, my party colleagues bring in Ms Bradshaw, and is maybe at some stage going to come to this committee to speak about it. But again, it points to a wider issue that maybe we are not dealing with. And it's not just a one-sided issue. Again, I've cycled the border from just outside Newry all the way up to just outside Derry. These issues are right across the countryside, by one side or another. We can say it's this, we can say it's that. I'd agree with Mr McNulty too. Southdown has a fair share of Sinn Féin signs at crossroads. It's something that is done. But equally, go up the country a bit more, and there'll be no sea border. There'll be whatever this and whatever that, and it is. Yes, I'm bored, and yes, I'm exhausted, and that's about all I can say in that matter.
I understand that, Andrew. No, thank you for that. Cathal.
Chair, listen, thank you very much, and it's been give a good hearing, and we've all heard this on a number of occasions, and the Minister respond. Just from my point of view, Chair, in terms of, I was unfortunately had to leave at 12 o'clock today. To move the process on, Chair, what's your direction in this? Because the Minister's in next week. Are you per se going to detail a timeline on what we're going to talk through? Because I mean, I don't want to spend 3 hours next week talking about this one issue. The Minister's coming in with serious issues. Yeah. If there's any questions arising from the day, that's 100%. If the committee wants to ask questions, but we need to move this on, Chair, because whilst everybody else saying there's loads of other issues, it seems to me this is the only issue been talked about today. And my colleague previous to me has mentioned there's a number of these things up right across the whole of the north. So just seeking your direction, Chair, to move forward, to be honest with you, for today's purposes, because like I say, it's given a fair hearing, but it seems to me it's only one issue, and then so let's move forward. If there's questions or suggestions there, let's put them there. Michael can read them out exactly from your direction, and we'll see. We'll move this process on. Thank you.
Nope. Thank you, Cathal. I mean, I'm happy to have a chat at the end in terms of how the committee wants to deal with the session with the Minister next week. I have my own ideas about that. I don't mean in terms of content, I mean in terms of organisation, because I've certainly seen it in other committees that it can slightly unravel. I don't believe, Cathal, in answer to your question, that this will be in any way the sole issue next week. My questioning is around other things in terms of potholes. The fact our house prices are going up.
Well, that's a good subject, Chair. Maybe we should talk about it.
Well, I'm sure we will. I have done some chatting about it, as you know, in the last couple of weeks. So I don't suspect. Certainly, I was on another committee, and they talked about, for the better part of an hour and 30 minutes, one issue on education, which I thought was shameful when the Minister was there. That's my personal opinion. Because there
I'm sorry to interrupt. No, all I'm looking is that if you want to do a timeline, identify the 5 or 6 major subjects, and let's identify a timeline for that. That's all I'm saying. Sure. And give everything a fair hearing. You know, that's all I'm asking. Yeah. But like I say, Chair, I'll not be here at the end. I'll be gone at 12 o'clock, so I'll not be able to take part in that discussion if you're leaving that to the end of the meeting. But I'm sure my colleague will be there. But I'm happy enough. All I'm suggesting is we have the Minister in next week, and we want to use the best time to get the best value out of the meeting. That's all I'm suggesting. Yeah.
No, that's fine, Cathal. We will have that more in terms of how the logistics of that session will work. Look, on this particular issue, my view, and it has been asked, is that 3 months ago, DFI should have gone and taken the billboard down. That's my view, because then we wouldn't be talking about it anymore. They didn't do that. Sitting behind is my frustration that at every point, and I agree with other colleagues on this, that actually my sense is this has been getting blood from a stone. And I think if it's been dealt with more openly and more fulsomely at the start, again, this issue would be off our desks, and we'd be talking about misconnections in sewers and house prices and car parking charges and all the things that are so important in Northern Ireland, and potholes, of course, as well. But the reason that we are still talking about it is because there's this drip feed of information. I agree with Justin on this. The more we get on this, the more questions actually arise from it, because we didn't know X, we didn't know Y, we hadn't heard of this beforehand, and it takes FOIs to get some of this information. It's my view that is why this issue is still being discussed at this committee, not because committee members have any great enthusiasm to discuss it, because it is a micro issue in terms of what this committee could be discussing, but it is because of the responses that we have got, or lack thereof, from the department. I'm going to park it there, and I'm going to go to Michael. Okay, Militia, your hand is up. I'll give you a secondary bite at the cherry. Yes, sir.
Yeah, secondly, I think, Chair, again, just to reiterate, that the Minister, Liz Kimmins, was interrogated thoroughly on this whole issue in the House, and she wasn't in any way evasive, not in the slightest. In fact, she answered every question very, very comprehensively and directly. And that, again, too, I just hope that we're not going to end up wasting more time harrowing ground that has already been well enough ploughed.
I take the agricultural reference. Well done, Militia, on that one. I don't think there will be an interrogation. I wouldn't want to see an interrogation at this committee. This committee is about scrutiny and holding ministers to account. Michael, I'm going to hand over to you. Is there anything that you have summarised from our discussion there that you want to highlight?
There are no actions that I detected from members there, Chair.
Okay. Do any members have any specific actions they want to suggest, or are we quite happy to park this at this point? And if members wish to, there will be a chance to raise this next week should they wish to use time at that point.
We could write back to the Minister and ask her, has there been a structural assessment conducted on this structure, and who would be responsible if there's a catastrophic failure? We've asked that a number of times already. And was TransLink notified about the works close to the proximity of a railway line?
I know that they weren't, Justin, because I think we got core back on that. On the wider one, did they ever come back with structural assessment?
They did. So those 3 questions have been asked in the past in correspondence. So
it was a visual assessment as opposed to
a visual assessment.
But how do you know its foundations are structurally sound?
I think the answer is they don't, because it's never been.
So catastrophic failure of this billboard at a major junction, who's responsible?
The owners?
Who are the owners?
Well, we don't know. That requires court.
The owners who correspondence was sent to by the
They're not the
department.
owners. Sorry, Chair. Sorry. I
think the discussion across the committee, I think to a degree, elucidates some of the frustrations we have around this issue, because you know what, we don't know. There are a range of opinions, but we're going to park it there. I think what we will do is we'll ask DFI the question: if there was a catastrophic failure of the billboard and it came off and damaged someone's car or damaged someone, who would be responsible? Who in DFI's mind would be responsible for that?
Sorry, Chair, I mean, I am getting slightly exasperated here because we know what's going to come back, because as we've just had the 2 and 4th, it will be the department will say something along the lines, it's the owners. We don't know who the owners are. There's lines in that correspondence that indicate how one does find owners. I mean, but so that's where I feel that anyway, that's where it's going to end up, I think. But this is
frustrating.
It's just, again, I go back to the stage. We've been talking about this in the chamber 2 or 3 times. We've been talking about this in this committee a couple of times. It is incredibly frustrating, but when we take it in the round of wastewater infrastructure, and we take it in the round of climate change, and we take it in the round of potholes, I am just frustrated, Chair.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Michael, you've got one. Do you want
to? Just to say that the committee has written to ask that question in the past.
Has it got a response on that one? You won't know from where your POV at this point in time. If it did get a response, can we circulate? Yes. That'd be great. Okay, we're going to park it there, gentlemen. Right, and at page 109, we have correspondence from the South Antrim Community Transport Organisation, who I was out with recently, regarding challenges facing the community transport sector in Northern Ireland. So my members committee did hear from CTA on the 21st of May. I wasn't here, and has corresponded. The committee heard on the 26th of November about the phase review being undertaken by the department, although I don't think we had evidence on that one. The 2 main issues that they raised, and it's not about South Antrim, I think it's probably an issue that CTA, which covers all of Northern Ireland, face, is funding and reform of the driving qualifications for bus drivers. Now, on the funding piece, credit to the Minister. She, I think, funded CTA more or less fully in this budget round, which is great. CTA do an amazing job around Northern Ireland, moving folks about who don't have transport options. They also cited the reform of driving qualifications for bus drivers, which is a separate issue. And you will see the correspondence there. At this point in time, I would be content to seek committee agreement to write to the department to ask for an update on the reviewing of driver licence requirements for bus drivers in CTA, with a possible view of getting them in at some point in the future to give us some oral evidence, depending on what the department come back with and what the committee's view on it is. We all have CTA in our own constituencies, and they obviously span across Northern Ireland. But in the first instance, do I have committee agreement to write to the department to ask for an update?
Yes, Chair.
Any comments on it?
Just to say, it's not just within that community transport, although it's a massive piece, Chair. I think that the access volunteers, particularly, who are trying to assist charities, voluntary organisations and other sporting organisations, are finding it difficult not only to get volunteers, but then to make them jump through the hoops. And I think any flexibility at all that could be applied to it within the realms of public safety and of driver safety would be really welcome. I think it's something that could be constructive and possibly a quick win. So I think anything that could be done with the department would be welcome.
Absolutely, no, I agree. So we will write out to the department on that one. At page 132, if you're following on, we have correspondence from the Motorcycle Action Group, which you'll see there, and I just need to seek committee agreement on that one to forward it on to the department if committee's agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Okay. The only other one I have is item 6.11, which is a letter from the CEF in response to committee correspondence regarding wastewater constraints and the effect on the housing market. I want to take members to a graphic, and I can't actually tell you what that graphic number is, but it's from Property Pal. Other estate agents are available, but it's the housing market overview Q4 2025, and they have quite a very, very interesting. I would certainly encourage members, if they haven't yet, to have a look at that. What page is that on, Michael?
Page 149.
149, if you want to follow. And essentially what this shows is it has a lot of data on it, but I picked up one which is the annual price growth of houses in Northern Ireland, which is sitting at the moment in terms of Q4 at 6.4%. And I did have a look then at the comparative figures for the whole of the UK and the Republic of Ireland. And the UK is sitting at 3.7 and the Republic of Ireland is sitting just shy of 10. So we are well ahead of the average growth in house prices across the rest of the United Kingdom, and significantly lower than the Republic of Ireland. But we know the pressures and extreme difficulties that people have in the south in terms of buying houses and even renting houses. The line on this from CEF was, this is a warning shot to the department. Okay, this is saying annual price growth of houses is significantly higher than the rest of the UK. And we have to ask the question, and I think it's legitimate for this committee to ask this question, why is that? And we know exactly why it is. It's connected to issues that Andrew has already mentioned this morning: wastewater infrastructure, planning, and misconnections, and the issues around Northern Ireland water. My fear is, and I want to verbalise and get it on the record again at this committee, that if DFI do not get a handle on this issue, this will continue, and young families who are trying to buy houses or people who are trying to rent houses will find it increasingly difficult because the level of supply is contracted and demand is stayed static, and the economic effect of that on our housing market is that prices will rise, and they will continue to rise. And look, I don't know if anyone has any other views on that. That is my fear, and it's worth reiterating it at this committee so that the department are aware of it, and perhaps we will write something to the department along these lines, because it would be foolhardy for this committee not to see where this is going and not to hold the department to account, because it is their responsibility, both in terms of planning and sorting out the issue with Northern Ireland Water so we can start building houses, which will then stop what CAF are highlighting to us. Justin, I think you indicated there.
Did the Minister not say the three-pronged approach was going to solve this issue?
I think the Minister did say that. The three prongs.
Three-strawed approach, forgive me.
I will, as a neutral committee chair, probably use the prongs. You have more latitude in terms of how you frame the Minister's strategy. However, that is more money from British Treasury, voluntary contributions from developers, and SUDs.
We write to the Minister and ask to what degree will her three-pronged approach resolve this housing crisis in the north?
So I'm not sure, Andrew, I'm not sure if we have, and the Minister has, the Department have come back on that specifically, Michael?
We have indeed. I can circulate that response.
Okay, let's circulate it, and let's put a marker down that whilst there's been frustration over an arch in Newry, this is a real and present danger to young families who are trying to buy houses in Northern Ireland, to people who are trying to rent houses in Northern Ireland. And I feel we have a year left in this mandate. I do not think that the three-pronged approach is going to solve this for a whole range of reasons, and this problem will continue to get worse. This committee's job is to scrutinise that problem. It's to offer solutions to the problem if we come up with some to the Minister and to be helpful in that way. But also to hold DFI and the Minister to account for this issue. And I'm sure we will probably do that next week. But I wanted to flag that up. Any other views on that, folks? Okay, so that is core. I'm more than happy to take any other articles or items there that people wish to highlight that I have not. I don't want to be accused of not giving people their place in terms of the items. So if you have anything else from the core you want to raise.
If I just might come in on one, it's related to page 142, the Association of British Insurers, and they've set out the amount of costs in there, and we know that despite what it's saying that insurance premiums are actually down this year, we're continuing to hear astronomical quotes, particularly for our young people.
Yep.
Related to that, and I don't want to get into a discussion at this stage around potholes, but it is connected to it indirectly. We know that over £20 million has been paid out in compensation in the last 5 years. Yep. We haven't got evidence for this year. But we also know that around 80% of claims aren't paid out, and if they're in and around the same value, that means between 60 and 80 million pounds of our constituents have not been paid out, but yet paid for damage. I'd like to know from the department what their assessment is at this stage of the application for claims that have been damage to vehicles paid by the people who own the cars but not paid out, to give us an assessment of just how much damage is being done, because the £20 million for 5 years is pretty shocking, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to the money that's not paid out. Yeah. It might be difficult as well to ascertain the impact on insurance premiums, but if there was any way of getting from either the ABI or any other of the insurance providers just what their assessment is of the damage caused by potholes and then directly impacting on premiums, it'd be worthwhile knowing. I'm interested to see how we might do that.
That's very good, John. I agree completely. Interestingly, from my memory of that information that came in, their line seemed to be, cars are more, and I'm not doubting this, cars are more complex. There's lots of kit on them that makes it more complex to repair. I think the interesting question that you raise at the end is, what effect are our roads having in terms of those levels of impact, damage, and cost, to our constituents and the people who are getting their front end damage.
And that's before we get into the discussion, by the way, about what we're hearing from next, which is Cycling UK and the impact on real life issues between those who cycle and those who are on motorbikes.
Absolutely.
Who are even more impacted by the danger of it.
More
this
danger.
is around the cost specifically, if we could try and ascertain that.
Yep. Michael?
Just check. Is that from the department? Or?
If we could, certainly around what claims are submitted, Michael, and what claims, the value of claims not paid out to date, or certainly not approved.
Yeah.
I think it sits between 20 and 25% of applications are approved. It doesn't go anywhere near the 100% of the claim, but it would be really interesting to get those figures as a whole rather than just what's paid out.
And that's claims to the department?
To the department for damage caused by road defects and potholes.
Are you happy enough? That is a quiet yes. Okay, so in that case, we will note the, I need to seek committee agreement to note the rest of the core.
Read.
Yep. And that will seamlessly take us on to active travel delivery plan. And we are going to get some evidence this morning around this from Cycling UK. I'll take members to page 177, which is the clerk's memo, and then at page 179 is the active travel delivery plan from and Cycling UK are going to give us some written. Cycling UK have provided some written evidence at page 179. However, this morning I want to welcome Duncan and Andrew from Cycling UK. I need to seek committee agreement that evidence is recorded by Hansard. The committee happy enough with that? Agreed. And then I can invite Duncan and Andrew to make an opening statement, which can be up to 10 minutes. And at the end of that, you probably will expect some questions from the members, but the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the committee for hearing from us today. Andrew and I are from Cycling UK, which is a UK-wide charity. We've got members and member clubs throughout Northern Ireland. Andrew's our advocacy lead in Northern Ireland and I'm our head of campaigns. And we're all about getting more people cycling, particularly for short journeys, which aligns entirely with the Northern Ireland Bicycle Strategy, which was published in 2015, which has ambitious targets in relation to getting more people cycling, which we completely support. So that's a strategy with a vision that we're completely behind. And so we'd love to be coming here today to be complementing the delivery of that strategy. But that's quite difficult in the light of the recent Audit Commission report, which says there's been minimal delivery upon that strategy. So why are we here? Well, on the agenda it says we're here to talk about the active travel delivery plan. But it's a little bit difficult to talk in detail about that because we haven't actually seen it. What we did see was a draft plan in November 2024, which recommended that there was delivery across 42 settlements outside of Belfast with a population of over 5,000. And we were pretty alarmed when we saw that draft because it was missing any discernible framework for prioritising what would be done first and where and how those decisions would be made. And we hadn't been consulted around the draft, otherwise we would have made that point. So we responded to the consultation, which closed last February, and we've had no engagement since in relation to that. So it might be that you're about to be given a wonderful plan which has detailed maps of the routes in particular areas which are going to be prioritised in which order and a detailed framework for how those decisions are going to be made. But frankly, we're a bit sceptical about that, and we've seen or heard nothing to suggest that that clear prioritisation framework is there. So why does that matter? Well, perhaps I'll deal with that with a quick what-if story. What if today we weren't here talking about cycling or active travel, but this committee was looking at the delivery of health or education services in Northern Ireland? And you were all asking questions about whether targets were being met or whether services were being delivered. Just imagine that was on the back of a pretty damning Audit Commission report on either of those topics that questioned governance and stakeholder engagement and delivery against targets. And just in the middle of that, I said to you, well, just to let you know, whilst all this has been going on, we've actually been spending 4 times as much money on all of this than we originally told you we were spending, and that we told the public we were spending, and that we told MLAs and this committee previously we were spending. But don't worry, because we have a plan. And our plan is we're going to double down, and despite the fact that we've been struggling to meet these performance targets, we're going to go big. We're going to go bigger. We're going to deliver further and farther, and we're going to actually increase what we do. I think if I said that to you, alarm bells would be starting to ring at that point. But that's exactly where we are with the active travel delivery plan, certainly at the draft stage that we've seen. As the Audit Commission report makes clear, the Belfast bicycle plan, which has been published several years ago, by now we should have had 130 kilometres of cycle lanes delivered under that plan, and there's 4 kilometres delivered. So when there's a draft plan that says we're now going to go big and 42 settlements, 200 kilometres of delivery outside of Belfast across 42 communities, that feels like a wish list rather than a plan. Now, I understand entirely why there's a proposal to go to multiple settlements, because the principles of regional fairness and equity are hugely important in relation to the distribution of public funds. But if you've only got the money to build 2 swimming pools, you don't build a little bit of one in lots of different towns, because you're just going to upset everybody and nobody's going to be satisfied. You're just going to have regional equality of a distribution of a poor service. And so this isn't a pitch for more money for active travel. Won't come as any surprise that I think there should be more money spent on active travel, but members of this committee, some of you will have a different view. But what I suspect we all agree on is that the money that is spent should be spent well with a high return on investment. And our concern is that the approach taken with the active travel delivery plan, that's not what you're likely to get. And the reason for that comes down to prioritisation, because if you've only got the money and the resource to build 15 kilometres of cycle lane, what do? Do you build 400 metres in loads of places that don't connect to each other, so nobody uses them, so the public see all these cycle lanes and think, well, that was a waste of money, they don't connect to anywhere? Or do you take a strategic decision to prioritise certain areas first and build in 2 or 3 places, which does mean that a community might feel that they've been left behind at the start, but what you do build is connected, so you get more people cycling, the public see this as a benefit that works, politicians see it as a sensible use of money, and it looks as though it's a wise investment. But that doesn't appear to be the DFI's thinking in terms of the active travel delivery plan, because it's based around equity and fairness and distribution across the board. And that's really important because it links back to where I started from, which was the what if in relation to the amount of the money that's being spent or being claimed to be spent. Spoiler alert, we don't think the amount of money that's being claimed to be spent is being spent. But it's really important because it links to that. In 2024, the Department for Infrastructure was saying we're spending about 12 million a year on active travel. The Minister was saying in June 24, we spent 61 million over an 8-year period. The highest was last year, 13 million. And all the debates leading up to the passing of the Climate Act, members were talking about spending about 10 or 12 million on active travel. And then the Audit Commission started doing a report at the beginning of last year. And by June, miraculously, the DFI was spending 50 million on active travel and had been for a number of years. Well, it won't come as a great surprise to members of this committee to hear that stakeholders just don't believe the numbers. And that is something that the Audit Commission flagged as a major concern in the report, because they said there's a major problem with stakeholder engagement, and there's a danger that if the DFI reclassifies how they say they're spending the money and what the numbers are without any consultation with anybody, that, to quote the Audit Commission, it will look like window dressing. And it will look as though it'll be self-defeating. And we're already seeing that it's self-defeating because we've been listening to recent debates in the Assembly, and we're already hearing the questions about the money that's being spent on active travel. If Andrew appears on the Nolan show tomorrow, the first question he's going to get is 50 million spent on active travel when they thought it was 12 or 13. By the time he's tried to explain that we don't think it's that, the argument's lost and we're talking about cycle lanes that nobody's using. So the narrative that's being presented is self-defeating and undermining the case for active travel in Northern Ireland. Now, that links to my final point, which is the stakeholder engagement point. If there was a system of stakeholder engagement, some of those conversations about how are you going to do your prioritisation And is it really in your best interest to be saying that you've spent 50 million and bringing things in from other budgets of existing spend to add to the active travel budget to say that you're getting towards the 10% target? Is any of that really helpful? And is it really helping this committee to actually do your job in relation to scrutiny if there's that confusion about the spend? And the lack of stakeholder engagement was the final recommendation in the Audit Commission that I'm going to mention, because they said there's a desperate need for a stakeholder engagement group, something that was promised 3 years ago. And at the last committee hearing, the DFI said they were excited about that and hoped to get it up and running by May. Well, if you had an issue in your community, and I'd said to you 3 years ago, I understand that, I think we need a stakeholder meeting about that. Trust me, leave it with me. I'll set up a stakeholder group to start discussing that with you. And for 3 years, I'd repeated that particular assurance that we were going to do that. And a month ago was saying I was excited about the prospect of doing it. I think you might be starting to A, lose patience, and B, be a little bit less than excited about the prospect of when that was going to happen. I started by saying we'd prefer to be here complementing the DFI on the delivery of a strategy, the goals of which we massively support. I really hope that the next time somebody from Cycling UK is before the committee, we can do that. But there's far more chance of doing that if there's a rapid change of attitude in terms of stakeholder engagement. I hope that's helpful for context. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Look, Duncan, that was very, very useful and gives a really clear summary of, I think, where Cycling UK is coming from. You will have watched this committee, you will know what happens. We're going to ask a few questions and I'm going to start. And you did cite the very critical Audit Office report, the very recent one as well. So in terms of active travel spend, and this is more of a sort of searching neutral question to see where you guys are on this, certainly my understanding is that DFI and how they attribute spend, some of that money is being used on fixing footpaths and fixing lights. Okay, I mean, I suppose my question really is, I mean, would you accept, I know you're from Cycling UK, but it is about active travel, and some people would say active travel is my mum walking, you know, to the local mace and back again, which she does do. I mean, in your view, is that active travel, and is it legitimate to be spending some of this money, and I hope I'm getting all this right, but I think I am, on making footpaths safe? Especially for the elderly, and making sure they're lit. What's your view on that?
It can be, and there's sorry to go into a bit of numbers, but I'll give you an example. Coomber Greenway, that's Coomber Greenway, that is separated from the road. It's pedestrians and cyclists only. Okay, there's lighting on that. That is clearly a legitimate active travel spend. It should be coded to the active travel budget. Now, in a response we got from, actually not a response we got, in a response I think this committee got from the Department for Infrastructure, there was a reference to Cork Council spending money on lighting and allocating it to the active travel budget. Now, Cork have many more of those examples of greenways or routes than Belfast does, for example, where it's completely separated. So they had a budget line saying that in relation to a similar overall budget, they'd spent £52,000 on lighting. The DFI is saying, when we only have one or two examples of the greenway that I've mentioned, that out of 50 million spend, 22.3 million went on lighting that was linked to active travel. That's just nonsense. That's lighting for arterial roads where it's lighting for a different purpose. So the principle that some lighting should be attributed to an active travel budget is perfectly fine. But you'll probably guess the scepticism about the figures that were being given.
I think as well, I mean, to add to that, you know, there's some really good comparisons given the resource we have. The top line of the budget that was presented to you talks about dedicated active travel delivery. And that's the number that everyone thought was the number, right? That's the number that Scotland used when they talk about active travel investment. That's the number that Ireland use, that Wales use, that England use. That's the number, right? It was 12 million, 22-23, and the DFI, I think, stated a couple of weeks ago in this chamber that it's gone up to 18 million. Now, that's meaningful, and that's a meaningful increase, but it's not 50 million. So the self-defeating, quoting again from the Audit Office, it is self-defeating to claim you've spent 50 million when the number is 18. Actually, we would have said that's a really good increase in 1 year, given you're going to have to accelerate increase over years. You've got a really low starting point. Let's talk about that number. It's more realistic when you have an assembly debate on how much is actually being spent, but nowhere else is bringing in all these other things. Unfortunately, the approach to the Climate Act, as is often the case, I was talking to the Audit Office, it's not unique to DFI. Things become a box-ticking exercise. The point of the Climate Act was to change things. The point of that amendment wasn't to even build more cycle lanes, wasn't to make footpaths better. It was to get more people walking and cycling. That needs to be the focus, but the focus seems to have been, how can we get as close to 10% as possible without actually doing anything? There wasn't an increase in spending on active travel from 12 million to 50 million. There just wasn't. There was an increase in the last year from 12 to 18. Let's talk about that.
That's fine. I mean, I suppose anyone watching this committee, I would hope would feel that we properly scrutinise the minister. Don't know if you saw the earlier session where we were certainly discussing one particular issue that we've been discussing for quite a while. What I would reflect is on whilst DFI have got more money this year than they ever have. There is real budget pressure, and the minister is having to make, difficult decisions, as are all ministers, regarding how they spend money and how they prioritise. But anyway, I'm sure she'll make that point next week. You mentioned prioritisation of routes on the way through there, Duncan. So my second question really is, and I think you accepted the concept of there is just so much money, which is a function of scarcity within economics. And I think, I wrote down spend, what would you like to see happen? And I think there was a sort of a context of that, not 20 routes of 300 metres, but, more chunky stuff. I'm sure the department, if they were replying to that, would say equity and fairness and distribution are really important, because that's what we do. We don't want to be seen to be favouring areas. In terms of, if you're asked prioritisation, what would you like to see?
There's a tool that's been developed, which the DFI now have. It's called the cycle prioritisation tool, and that you can actually crunch the numbers in relation to, if you build this, how many people will use it. And it's based on population sentence. Like most tools, it requires some context. But the short position is you have to make a difficult decision that you can't actually, with a limited budget, deliver everywhere. Now, that isn't you can't deliver everywhere at any time, but you do have to start with somewhere. Otherwise, you have that situation I described where you have half a kilometre in 25 different towns, which benefits nobody. Now, that isn't about favouring one particular area over another. It's just about prioritising where you start and having a sequence, and we're not seeing any of that in relation to the approach that's being taken by the DFI. It is attractive to say we need to be fair, we need to be equal, everybody needs to get a slice of the pie in relation to it. But international experience will say that is a recipe for undermining confidence in active travel, because you'll spend money and get no return.
What was that modelling called? Cycling prioritisation?
The propensity to cycle tool. So there is now a propensity to cycle tool for Northern Ireland, I believe, that was developed after the draft plan with DFI. I would add to that, there's a really, really good comparison, strong comparison. You might have heard of Dunleary Rathdown Council. Duncan and I had the privilege of visiting them and meeting with the council. They're one of the sort of front runners in terms of developing active travel infrastructure in their area. 250,000 people. Compare this to Northern Ireland, about an eighth of the size in population, a relatively large town. They have about the same active travel budget for delivering projects year on year. That's sort of been guaranteed for 10 years, which is incredible. They have about the same number of staff, right? an eighth of the size, and that's where their resource, the same resource we have, it is going into one town of 250,000 people. We're not saying we have to do that. We're not saying concentrate it in Belfast. But the reality is we're not going to be able to spread that across 42 towns and cities and have a meaningful. And again, the big picture is this is about getting more people walking and cycling. That has to be at the front.
Well, that's fine. Look, you've managed to fill my list already. I haven't even finished with my questions, and everyone on the committee wants to ask something. So, my final question then is really just around that stakeholder engagement piece. I think, Duncan, you were certainly representing some frustrations around the level of stakeholder engagement. I did remember that when we had the department officials last time, they did say it was going to start in May. I think that was the commitment they gave, because I asked them that question and that's what they replied with. Stakeholder engagement is always best, in my experience of, and I've had plenty of experience in this area, is you get in early and then you bring people along with you. I mean, when is the earliest that you think the department should have been carrying that out in the wider picture of what we're discussing today?
I mean, we should have started this 3 years ago. We had a meeting with the DFI in March, April 23 to reset relationships, and stakeholder engagement meeting was agreed then. It wasn't suggested, it was agreed. Okay. It's been overthought. We've had explanations which are on the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, this is an exact quote, we need to get the remit of it right. It's a little bit more complicated. We need to sort out the governance. It's being overthought. It shouldn't take 3 years to arrange a meeting with willing participants who want to engage. Yeah. And that's the scenario that we've got. It shouldn't take until May to set that up. That should be expedited. Yeah.
Okay. It's especially poignant for me. It was the week we had that conversation, the week before my son was born, and he's about to turn 3, so I'm quite aware it was 3 years ago. There was actually a meeting that November that was called the Stakeholder Engagement Forum. It was quite a small meeting about a very specific thing, so I guess we thought it had started then, but that was the only time it happened.
Well, thank you for that, Andrew. Okay. John, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming along today. A really useful discussion so far. I think just to follow up on the stakeholder engagement piece, and I sense your frustration, I think it is deeply lamentable, to be fair, to say that it hasn't met to this point, and it does strike me that there just has not been the engagement it needs to be with the people who are going to be using the facilities, particularly like of yourself. In the Audit Office report, it talked about window dressing and the potential for that to happen, that almost there was a statutory requirement to spend a certain amount of money, and that in order to try and deliver that, just tick boxes were ticked. Do you believe there's any coordinated or strategic approach to how things are being done at the minute? Because certainly the feedback that I'm getting from people, and I point to my constituency, for example, where we saw £600,000 plus spent on a fence that wasn't required, that ticked a box on active travel. To me, when every pound's a prisoner, that was not good use of money, didn't fit into any coordinated strategic approach. That was my opinion. I remain of that opinion, haven't been convinced otherwise. Do you believe, as key stakeholders, that there is a coordinated strategic approach to active travel spend?
There needs to be a more coordinated approach than there is, and the Commission said that in their report, that the various strategies and plans that we have, from the Belfast cycle network to the bicycle strategy to the Greenway plan, were not coordinated, and the people were working on them without a common understanding of what the overall goal was. And they made a recommendation for there to be an overarching strategy statement which had timescales and objectives and performance criteria in relation to that. And I do think we're missing that, and we're missing that understanding of the prioritisation of what the money should be spent on and how that should be decided. The worst thing for us as advocates for more money to be spent on active travel, which again you may not all agree with, is for existing money to be spent badly.
Yes.
And that's what we need to make sure doesn't happen.
Absolutely. And then to take it back to the Stakeholder Engagement Forum, how key then will that body be in directing what needs to happen to make it strategic and coordinated, and how do you see it operating within that framework?
Really keen for the stakeholder forum to be established as soon as possible. I don't want to delay it for conversations about other things, but there are some wider governance issues which are also needed to be resolved. The other thing that was to be established is the government's requirement, which the DFI have committed to do, is an active travel board, and they said that they would do that 3 years ago. But there's an active travel board in Wales which has an independent chair. There's an active travel board in Wales that has independent members. At the moment, we don't know how the active travel board in Northern Ireland is going to be established. There is a reference to it being chaired by a director of the department. There's a danger if that's a board which is essentially made up of people from the department, it's the DFI marking its own homework. And so there's some governance issues that need to be addressed that link to that, and the ability of the stakeholder engagement forum to influence does partly link into what are the other governance arrangements that are set in place.
That's really interesting. I suppose one of the few benefits of being so late to the table compared to other areas is that we can look at models of best practice. What has worked well, what has worked well, and what's gone badly. You pointed to one of the councillors, I think in Scotland there. Are there, out of those experiences elsewhere in these islands or elsewhere around the world, where do you look to say that is the pristine model that we would like to see in terms of stakeholder engagement and delivery of this type of strategy?
There are different... I have the benefit in my job of seeing how things are delivered differently in England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland in a bit of a hovercraft view.
Yes.
And there are different things that are done well. So Wales does the Active Travel Advisory Board really well. They have independent people on. They have stakeholder engagement that's done really well in relation to it. Sorry to be blunt about it, but stakeholder engagement is worse here than anywhere we work. I mean, that's the sad reality in relation to it. There are aspects that are done better elsewhere and not always perfectly, but we haven't got off the ground in Northern Ireland in relation to meaningful stakeholder engagement.
Okay. One of the, I mean, you guys will know, one of the unique things about Northern Ireland is all transport authority is held in one department rather than being devolved to councils. So, you know, it does add a greater challenge. You don't have that on the ground engagement, but it's important to engage with councils, but also local groups. I know, Peter, you know, you're engaged with the local group in Ards and North Down, and I know that was a really valuable way of DFI engaging, and I would indeed say DFI, you know, from their point of view, did engage quite well with the groups. So there is examples of it here, but as an overall, it is, yeah, quite poor.
If we could move on to the spend itself, and there does continue to be ambiguity about what is and what is not active travel spend, despite the figures which have been clearly massaged from the points that you make. What does and does not constitute active travel spend? So one of the complaints that I get from cyclists particularly is that while there's not enough cycle lanes, the roads that they're using are simply not safe, and they are rural roads. So do you believe, for example, that active travel spend could or should be able to be spent on main roads that cyclists are using, particularly in rural areas, or should it be for new spend on new schemes, or a combination of both?
You can have active travel spend in rural areas. It can be on different types of schemes. For if you imagine it in relation to more rural towns and villages, you might have a traffic calming scheme which makes the roads more attractive in relation to use by people walking and cycling. Your active travel scheme might involve bringing a 20 mph limit into a town centre, for example. So there are ways to do that. It doesn't always have to be a separated cycle lane in relation to things. So there are ways to do that. And it would be fair to say that there's an element of grey in relation to this. And we've come across that element of grey in other countries, but the element of grey is never presented with as a major problem with the overall figures in the way that it's presenting us with a problem here.
Okay, Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note on this one, you know, we're not ideological about this, as Peter said. This is, you know, it's a challenging time in budgets. The fact is we're at probably less than 2%, right? If we're talking about that 10. Again, right, it's not about the 10. It's about a meaningful increase year on year, and we've said that to DFI, and we know there's going to be years where that's tougher, but we need to see that meaningful increase, and it needs to be based on the figures that we can use to compare ourselves to other places, because ultimately that's how you know whether you're investing. Northern Ireland still, despite the 50 million, we still invest a fraction per head on active travel. I think as well, you know, we agree with the priorities set out in the department's active travel delivery plan of connecting schools, town centres and transport hubs. Rural roads
are not going to be the main gateway for people starting to use walking and cycling to get around. It is those closer to town centre areas where there's more concentration of people. So starting to dig into the really small active travel budget to repair potholes, you'll quickly come up short on both, and then you're likely to exacerbate the problem if you don't enable more people to travel actively.
Okay, and just to finish off, Chair, to follow on that point, you talked about the town centres and about schools being involved. Do you believe that there is a collegiate enough approach between local governments, Department of Infrastructure, Department of Education, DAERA, when it comes to the likes of our reservoirs and and the parks around those, to make sure that everything that can be done is being done to promote and create as many opportunities for active travel and for cyclists that could be being done?
The third governance proposal that it's supposed to be coming in is the Active Travel Board, the Stakeholder Engagement Forum, and there's a third forum which is engagement with the councils and those other departments. But I'm sorry to say I don't know how much progress has been made on that particular one.
We'll maybe hear later on. I don't believe a great deal. I was just curious to get your take on it. Maybe more could be done, I think, would be fair to say. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. And just to say, I'm certainly supportive of cycling and the value of it. I know the committee has talked before around the cycling proficiency within schools and so on, and the value that brings. And we all have memories of that as well in schools and the positives around that. But I suppose just to come back to the point that has been mentioned around the roads maintenance issue. In many areas, including rural and urban areas, there is not the option or the room for, dedicated cycle lanes as much as, we would all like to see that longer term. But, we are in the real world, all of us, and, the basic concept of, if a road is safe for cyclists, then it can be safe for all road users and also motorcyclists. And I know, you're rightly focused on cycling, but active travel, the definition as I understand it is cycling, walking and wheeling. So I suppose that, do you disagree with active travel money being used, to maintain those roads to a basic level? Because where I'm coming from, it's very much, given the financial pressures, if we can improve the roads, then they are safe for all users, including cyclists. Because I'm sure there is examples of it where a cyclist hits a pothole maybe in a half dark morning or evening, the consequences are lethal potentially.
Well, there's a couple of limbs to that.
Yeah.
We've long campaigned as an organisation for not just better road maintenance, but long-term approach to road maintenance.
Yeah.
So just to recap, go back slightly, if you're spending your budget fixing the potholes, you're spending your budget on the wrong thing, because the budget should be spent on maintaining the road so the potholes don't appear in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem that we've got here and elsewhere, that it's a patch and fix recipe for things that are crumbling.
There's a crisis on our roads at the minute, that's what we...
Whereas the budget needs to be spent on preventing those potholes appearing in the first place by having a road maintenance budget. The deficit, as I understand it, in terms of pothole repairs and the road maintenance liability in Northern Ireland is in the billions. It dwarfs any 10 or 12 million that might be spent on active travel infrastructure. So the answer to your question is massively in support of money being spent to avoid the potholes being fixed. I don't see that being taken out of a very small amount of active travel infrastructure spend of around 12-13 million. I don't see that being a solution for the actual pothole crisis, but I'm not minimising that crisis.
Yeah, but
it's the binary choice that I have.
Not just solely narrowing down on potholes, but also street light outages, mass street light outages, for example. We discourage many people, including females and younger and older residents, for example, walking in the dark. Broken footpaths where you have a family, maybe young children who wouldn't be confident yet on the road, will be cycling on the footpath. And if those footpaths, as we see in many areas, are broken, and damaged and unsafe, I think there needs to be that real priority, getting those basics right to allow active travel to flourish. we have seen, and my colleague Keith Buchanan, who used to be on this committee, often makes the point, made the point again in the chamber this week around, having cycle lanes to nowhere, does not benefit anyone, and I'm sure you'll agree with that. So I suppose I'm just keen to tease out your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Keith about footpaths and cycle lanes to nowhere, and I listened to him in the chamber yesterday. In fact, we were in touch with Keith about one of the more recent cycle lanes that's being built in his constituency, because it would seem to us, it's odd that seems to have been a priority. To address your overall point as directly as possible, there's a reality in Northern Ireland that we're really a car-dependent society. Mm-hmm. And the impetus with that is you start thinking, well, we have to just keep maintaining, and that then takes away from what you're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve as many people as possible using sustainable transport, whether that's public transport, walking and cycling, for lots of reasons: efficiency, congestion, health, air quality, climate change. So if you start taking money away, let's say you start to say, well, the bus is a translink, they need good road surfacing, so let's start increasing ticket prices on public transport. What you're going to do is discourage people from using public transport, and you're going to entrench the problem further. If you start removing money from a mode of transport that you want people to move to, you're going to discourage more people from moving there because you're not investing in it as much. So the potholes, as you say, are vitally important for people cycling. I deal with it. I've had very close, experiences due to the road condition. But the reality is, if we want to keep encouraging more people out of cars and onto other forms of transport where it's possible, we have to invest in those, and taking money away from those is going to do the opposite.
I appreciate that, but it's certainly, the current condition of the roads is certainly discouraging active travel. That's the case within my constituency, and I'm confident that it is right across Northern Ireland. But just a couple of final points. Just engagement with councils. I'm keen to hear, just from your own perspective, how engaged are you with the 11 councils? Is that something that's on your agenda, or have you done much on that, or going to do much on that? Or
I think it would be fair to say that because councils don't have highways responsibility in Northern Ireland, in terms of the list of things to do with a small team, we haven't had much council engagement. One of the frustrations that we have is that in terms of getting to where we are today, we're spending a huge amount of time and resource of the work of which we would like to do, for example, engaging with the councils, trying to get to the bottom of some answers from the DFI about the issues that we're talking about today. And that is somewhat draining our capacity to actually be involved in other things.
I appreciate that, yeah.
One of our models, given the sort of smaller teams, is we support local groups, because local groups have the local knowledge, they know the roads, and indeed in Peter, and I think yourself, your constituency, we helped support the startup of the Ards and North Down Cycle Campaign.
I've met with that group as well.
We're trying to do others. The reality is, those are the groups that are going to be engaging on that local level with councils. Cycling UK, it's limited as to how much of that we can do as a team.
I suppose just one of the council's remits with DFI as well as the Greenway. We've seen the success of Greenway, as you mentioned, Duncan, earlier about the Cumber Greenway. So I'm just keen to tease out around your thoughts on the sort of shared model approach, where cyclists and pedestrians, the shared path approach. I think, that can work in some places. In some places there's concerns around that too. And so we're just keen to hear your thoughts on that. It can become, some people say cyclists will run people over. I've heard that, and you'll be aware of that. So it's just getting that balance, I think, is
it all comes down to the volume of use. You can have shared path use where there's lower volumes of people walking and cycling. It's problematic if you've got high volumes of use, particularly at particular times of day. And there is guidance which basically says what the criteria should be in terms of numbers. I'd be struggling to actually quote the figures off the top of my head, but there is guidance in relation to that. So I think the shared use question comes down to how many people are you going to have or like to have using that particular path, and you shouldn't be having shared uses if it's a very high volume.
The examples like the Cumber Greenway, greenways are fantastic. They're a fantastic asset for lots of places. I sort of call them linear parks, because the reality is that's how people interact with them. They walk their dogs on them. Greenways don't tend to connect you to lots of places along a road. The roads connect you there. Greenways tend to be separate, so they're good between settlements. They're good in areas that might not have a public park, but the reality is they're not going to be a really strong part of the modal shift that we hope to see.
No, just very final point, Chair, just quickly. I think, is it fair to say that active travel, since COVID, has been generally on the increase. Certainly, you know, my experience is people are more out and about in their open spaces and parks and walking and enjoying, you know, the great outdoors that Northern Ireland offers. You know, is that something that you've seen, or is there evidence to back that up?
I answer that one in relation to just wider than Northern Ireland a little bit. What we saw in Northern Ireland and across the UK and in Ireland during COVID was an increase in people cycling. That was the biggest increase that ever been, and that was related particularly to COVID conditions and people not wanting to use public transport. There was then, as we got out of COVID, there was a drop and things went back to a little bit more than we had pre-COVID, but there was a spike during COVID and then everything dropped back. We're not really seeing an increase in Northern Ireland. That contrasts with places in England, Scotland and Wales where it's a nuanced picture. So what we're seeing in those countries is that where there is targeted investment, we're seeing massive increases in the number of people cycling. So I could take you to Manchester and Glasgow and Edinburgh and point to particular schemes and big increases in the numbers cycling. But it's not across the board for the reasons that I outlined at the start, that you can't spread the investment like jam. You have to target, and where there's been those targeted investments, there has been huge increases in the number of people cycling. London's the classic example. But we're not seeing that in Northern Ireland because we've yet to have that situation where there's the proof of concept thing where somebody can say, we did it in Derry, we did it in Bangor, or we did it in Belfast, and this is what happened.
Okay, thanks, folks. Thanks, Chair.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming in today. I want to rewind it back a little bit to the definition of active travel. I think whenever it's been explained previously, there's been some consternation about how wide it actually has been applied. And I remember when I was elected in 22, we had kind of informal conversations at that point because Stormont was down, and I remember one of the senior officials saying that they were working out the definition, like what is active travel. Do you have any other comparisons with other jurisdictions as to how they've taken active travel and what that means in comparison to how we have applied that definition?
Do you mean in relation to spend?
In relation to spend, yeah.
I mean, you know, you've got in your documents, there's a couple of strong comparisons that are countrywide. So Scotland, they had a sort of big headline figure, 22-23, we spent £165 million on active travel. And if you break down what they spent it on, the vast majority, and I mean, you know, 90+% is infrastructure. This is infrastructure investment. Ireland as well, €360 million in the same year. Again, around that 90%, you can say this is infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean new active travel schemes. Might be lighting on schemes like the Cumber Greenway, but it is new infrastructure on active travel schemes. That's what other places are talking about when they say active travel spend. Here, you sort of look at the 90% in those countries. Here, when we break down that 50 million figure, we're at best around 20% of it could be called infrastructure. So you can see this isn't a grey area. This is like, you know, a step change in what we refer to as active travel spend.
Okay. I chair the all-party group on active travel, as you'll know, and I think over the course of previous meetings, what we've had with stakeholders who come along to that meeting is really a kind of lack of communication and engagement, as we've heard already from yourself, Duncan, quite passionately, in terms of engagement with the department and comms issues, I think, that are arising from that. Car dominance has been mentioned by yourself, Andrew, as well. Do you think it's a lack of willingness to engage in active travel? Do you think there's a culture change that might need to take place within the department? Do you think it's lack of resources? I can't understand why things aren't moving faster when it comes to active travel. So do you think that's an issue just within the department itself, or do you think that maybe there's something wider?
I think there are people in the DFI who really want to see more people walking and cycling. So having been a little bit critical of engagement, I just want to put that out there. I think that they want to make this work, but systematically there is something that is not working to bring that together to make it happen. And I think that's a structural issue, rather than it's not out of malign intent. It's not out of a lack of desire to do it, but there's just some structural issues in relation to the way that's working. And without being repetitive, I think more engagement with stakeholders could help break down some of those issues and move it forward.
You've actually just triggered a memory in my head there. I think there used to be an active travel or a cycling champion, and I remember there was a conversation probably 2, maybe 3 years ago, and it was highlighted that that person had never been replaced. I think the position had lapsed and they'd never been replaced, but the idea was that everyone was cycling champions, but with too many doing one thing. You kind of need that leader to kind of grab an issue by the scruff of the neck and take it forward. Do you think that's maybe an issue when you talk about structural issues?
That's a really interesting question, because it was Liz McLaughlin, I think, who was the active travel champion, who was already an existing DFI senior members of staff. So somebody from within the department was effectively appointed to be the active travel champion. That's not the model that we've had elsewhere. And elsewhere, for example, in places, I'm sorry to quote places outside of Northern Ireland, but in England we had active travel commissioners who were independent, who were able to tell, for example, a Metro Mayor of Manchester, no, you're wrong. That's not how you do it. And if you're appointing me as an independent commissioner, I'm going to tell you what my advice is as the independent commissioner. And that's the model that had been applied in different places. So if you're going to have an active travel commissioner, it needs to be somebody who has the ability to be independent and actually challenge the Department for Infrastructure. And that goes back to the governance points.
Okay. You've spoken quite well there about the 42 approaches being taken across Northern Ireland, and I remember being a Belfast City Councillor and talking about the Belfast plan, and I don't think we're hugely much further on, so I don't have a great deal of confidence whenever we apply that across Northern Ireland, given how slow sometimes it is to get schemes off the ground. What do you think is a reasonable, given both your experience, a reasonable and appropriate amount of time to go from conception to boots on the ground to an active travel scheme being delivered? Because I think of a number of locations across Belfast and it just takes years to eventually get there. So based on your experience, what is a reasonable amount of time to try to deliver a scheme that's going to...
I'll give you an example of that. 2019, Greater Manchester announced they were going to have the B network, and the B network was a connection of walking and cycling routes across Greater Manchester. By 2024, they delivered 117 kilometres of routes, of cycling routes, and the estimate was 160 by the end of 2026. Caveat, they had a bigger budget, so I concede there was funding, that they had a budget to do stuff, but they still did the idea, concept, design, delivery within that 5-year period. And by 2024, they delivered a 6.5 mile separated cycle route in from Chorlton, which is a suburb of Greater Manchester, into the city centre in Deansgate. That was not an easy one to deliver. That's the classic, we've got roundabouts and side roads and major infrastructure, and we've got disruption, and there's going to be headaches. And they delivered that by the beginning of 2024, leading to a 65% increase in the number of people cycling in from Chorlton. So it doesn't have to be a 10-year plan to get something from idea through concept to design to delivery. It can be done quicker, and there are examples in many other places where that's happened.
And then just lastly, briefly, Andrew, you'd mentioned there about devolution of powers potentially to local councils. Have you had any conversation previously with the department on that? I reference this because I just become an MLA and I'd heard about how long it takes if you're organising a marathon, for example, closing off all the particular roads, and had investigated with the department the idea of maybe transferring those local powers to local councils. In terms of active travel, is this something you've discussed previously, or do you think it could greatly benefit?
We have we did mention it to a previous minister actually in a meeting, there's I think absolutely zero thought towards that at the moment. Doug and myself did do a bit of research a while ago about whether Northern Ireland was comparable in terms of who holds those transport powers, and I think we found Luxembourg and Greece are more centralised than other places, but nowhere is as centralised as Northern Ireland. Even in Luxembourg, local municipalities have control over, at the very least, local roads and active travel routes. So it is an unusual model. It's almost entirely unique. it's something that certainly for local routes we think should be considered. There are major positives to having it centralised. It's much easier to connect up to different areas. It's much easier to put in legislation and measures that are applied countrywide rather than council by council. But no, I don't think there's been a serious discussion about it yet in Northern Ireland.
Good. Militia, forgot I was the chair there for a second. Easily done, Militia. What are you?
You're the best chair.
Okay, Fatty Roll, thank you, sir. Very welcome here today. And it's disappointing to hear just that you hadn't been consulted in relation to the draft. And I'd like to ask you just, why do you think that was the case? And secondly, do you have any other avenues or foray in order to sort of present, we'll say, in fact, your views and opinions in relation to active travel?
In relation to the active travel delivery plan, I think it was myself. I went along to probably 3 or 4 of the public engagement events the department did hold, and we submitted our own, very comprehensive response along with the public consultation. I can't tell you why we weren't sort of reached out to before and after that. We do have occasional infrequent informal conversations with the department, but none of those I think reflected anything about the active travel delivery plan, and it certainly wasn't in a formal stakeholder forum setting. Informal communication with the department, you don't have any sort of... For example, when there was the legislation around taxis and bus lanes, we had a conversation, so we reached out to the department to have a conversation about that and our thoughts on it. And there's been a few sort of minor active travel schemes that us and the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust have reached out to the department to ask to talk about. But yeah, as I say, nothing formalised and no sort of stakeholder forum. Okay. Duncan, just on your presentation, you actually alluded to, and 2 of the words that you actually used at the time was fairness and equality, that where people seem to be hung up on that, seem to be the view when it comes to sort of the dispersion, we'll say, of funding and the likes of it to develop active travel programs. Well, I represent a very rural community in West Tyrone, and I live in probably one of the most rural towns in the north of Ireland, Castledairg. And I would know that it isn't just, we'll say, in terms of fairness and equality, but in particular in relation to safety. And I'm talking here about safety even for our young people and the likes of it, travelling to and from school and so on. And many of them now, because of programmes within the various schools, actually do that on bicycle. So really, it would really concern me whenever I hear your views, because I think, are we once again going to be condemned to provision for the greater number of people, such as other public services that are located, we'll say, in areas far removed from rural communities, because the excuse that they use is they're making provision for the greater number of people. So how would you actually relate to that, Duncan, in terms of your presentation?
Well, I've lived in rural communities most of my life, so I am very acutely aware of that sense of frustration, and that there are particularly rural safety issues. My comments were specifically around where you choose to spend an active travel budget to get the most impact. I think you can address some of those issues that you've talked about in terms of safety by looking at some of the safety issues in rural communities, perhaps through a different lens. I've been a little bit critical of some of the things the DFI have done in relation to active travel. The DFI are doing something extremely bold at the minute in relation to speed limits, consulting on speed limits, including speed limits on rural roads. That is an area where massive steps could be taken to improve rural safety, which is slightly tangential to, but complementary to, the active travel budget. So I'm not for a moment saying that steps should not be taken to address those issues. My point is just what you do with that particular active travel budget. And I think you have to look at those things in the round in terms of what resources being put into particular areas. And I'm not saying it in the context of let's just not do anything there, but I just think there are different things that you can do to address some of those safety concerns, particularly in rural areas.
Well, just on that, I would agree entirely with the whole concept, we'll say, of equality and fairness. And yet and all, when it does come to that, I do firmly believe that it is trumped by safety. And I'm thinking then again too, in particular, for young people and the likes of it that are travelling either in and out of rural towns and making use of, we'll say, the facilities there, and that where it's appropriate that it can be developed for them to encourage them, either whether it's walking or cycling. And I'd like to think of the Derry City and Staban area too. They've had some good examples of that, but in particular we'll say work that happens at the minute between Derry City and Staban Council and Donegal, the Donegal Council, in terms of cross-border provision, i.e. in greenways. And I know that you said that, okay, if greenways are to be used by an awful lot of people and so on, then that's a different ball game. But at the same time, I can see linkages there in terms of towns and villages within our area. And I focus in on Strabane in particular, we'll say that new development has taken place just on the Donegal side of the border that's given greater access to people to travel to and from work and the likes of it on bicycle or whatever. So is there that greater need, especially in the border communities, for that type of cooperation with each other and to learn from each other? And it's in the Republic as well too, where they've already had these speed limits and that introduced. And I do think that again too, that will be a very, very interesting development here in the north whenever we get to that stage.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Melissa. I think the Strabane Greenway, proposals are really good, and I think that Greenway network, actually one of the intentions is to connect some of those smaller towns, and I think a Greenway makes a lot more sense there. It's a lot more justifiable use of money and land than possibly a segregated cycle lane on a road. So yeah, fully agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Last but by no means least, Justin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Duncan and Andrew, for your evidence, and I'm sure you feel like you're banging your heads off a brick wall. Is that fair?
I think I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, one of the things that I don't want to find myself in is a situation where in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, if I or somebody else from Cycling UK have the privilege to be invited back to this committee, I don't want us to be having the same conversation. I want us to be actually sitting here saying the DFI have done a fantastic job and we've moved towards delivery against these goals. And that involves us being in a situation where we can have a meaningful engagement. So I don't want to burn bridges at this particular point in relation to that, but I do want to start some meaningful engagement.
Do you feel it's now time for almost a paradigm shift in terms of how people consider or perceive active travel, where sedentary lifestyles are going to be a huge burden on our whole economy? Encouraging and participating in active travel will actually be hugely economically beneficial.
Well, I could speak for ages about the benefits of active travel in terms of economic and well-being, but if just focusing on your health position, it always surprises me how little any of the governments across the UK spend on health prevention, illness prevention. We fix the problem after we've got it. And actually promoting active, healthy lifestyles to avoid people becoming ill is just about the best spend you can have of any sort of public health related budget. So yes, getting more people walking and cycling to school, getting more people walking and cycling those short journeys has massive long-term dividends in relation to the health budget as well.
Yeah, I think we had Professor Ian Walker over, who's a behavioural psychologist, and actually at an event in Stormont he spoke, and he said to me, I often say to people, tell me what your problem is and I'll tell you how active travel is part of the solution. And whether it's childhood independence, whether it's health, whether it's congestion, air quality, active travel has got to start playing a fundamental part of our transport system. my reality is I've 2 young kids, I've a house that's fallen down, of a busy job. I don't have the time to exercise, but my baseline, health is pretty good, and the reason for that is because I've built in activity to my everyday life. I'm lucky enough to be able to walk my kids to school. I'm lucky enough to be able to cycle to work, and those just keep my health at a certain point. And we all know there's a tipping point with health, and when you can build in activity to everyday tasks, it's almost like free exercise. So it's key and vital.
So where do we stand in a ranking table of European countries? Where does this little north stand in terms of active travel, participation and spend?
Well, looking at the spend, if we look at it on the figures in terms of spend on infrastructure schemes, you're at the bottom. You're very low. Now, obviously, the way the figures are now being presented, you've shot up the table, but we don't think they're an accurate reflection on certainly infrastructure spend. And in terms of levels of cycling, Northern Ireland's not doing particularly well either. Now, to be fair, there are huge numbers of places, for example, in England, which are not doing well, and we're not seeing an increase. And we're not seeing increases across the board in other nations in the way that we'd like to see. What we are seeing is big increases in certain places where there is the investment. And that gets back to the prioritisation. Where do you start? And you can't do it all at once, everywhere at the same time. But what we are seeing in other put it another way, Northern Ireland is the country where I'm struggling to show the example of where we've had some really good infrastructure, and we've therefore seen the increase. And I could take you to other places across the UK where I could give that example, and I could take you to places in Ireland where I could.
I could take you to places in the north where that's plainly clear, and that is the new greenway between Uri and Carlingford, where the Minister to Credit was involved, and that's just been, it's a game changer. Right. We need to see linkage between that and the Portadown Greenway, or Uri to Portadown Greenway along the canal. So exceptional uptake there, and to their credit. I would love to see your perspectives on a link between those 2 greenways through Newry City. But you also, the implication potentially, you're saying that there is a bit of book cooking going on. I won't ask you to comment on that. Just in terms of rural pathways, old rural rights of way, have you thought about creating a map where those can be actually created, or not created, included in an active travel network?
We haven't thought about creating a map in relation to it. That's not to say it's not a good idea. I suppose map creation isn't something that sits naturally with us in relation to that, but it's certainly something that we would be supportive of that being developed in terms of a network map, because occasionally there are routes that people don't know exist, and that can help them in terms of planning a route and getting more involved in active travel.
I think you raise a really good point with the 2 greenways that could be connected through the town. A good analogy of that is, someone wants to build a rail line to the airport. It's not just about the rail line to the airport. That enables then rail travel all the way along the route between wherever it is, the city and the airport, and connecting 2 separate greenways through a town does several different things. It creates a safe route within a town, and it connects to routes that go to further towns. So it's a good example of that has got to be part of a prioritisation framework. It's not just based on population. It's based on the existing infrastructure that's there and the potential for getting more people to cycle when you invest in it.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Justin, and apologies to Harry and to Andrew, who are out of sorts on my list. So not the last. There's more to come, more questions to come, gentlemen. Harry?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Just listening to some of your points and some of your concerns, maybe you could talk us through it again. Spending without consultation, I think you sort of says that was undermining active travel and leading to existing money being spent badly. I think it's all down to areas needing to be prioritised better, areas where the need is, places where they'll be most used or most useful. If I could have a few comments on that, please.
A couple of different things there. Just on the spend and the undermining point, saying we're now spending 50 million rather than a figure that's much lower, that only has one advantage, And the advantage that it has is it allows the DFI to say we're making progress towards a 10% target. But it undermines the case for active travel because people now think there's all this money being spent and we're not seeing delivery. We're not seeing more people cycling. So it's a short-term fix to a problem that there's this commitment and there's a perception that we need to deliver towards that commitment. Whereas what should be the focus is what are the outcomes? And the outcomes are getting more people cycling and what we need to do to reach those points. So it looks as though the sort of question's been asked the wrong way around. When we get to where the money is spent on particular schemes, we know that the best value for return in terms of more people using it is going to be on certain routes, and that presents the case for investment in more routes. If you're able to, as Manchester is, say we built this 6-kilometre route and we've now got 65% more people cycling on it, and this is the impact it's had, then that presents the case for the next one. Actually doing a route to nowhere, which is easy because perhaps the verge is already owned by the DFI, because nobody's going to particularly object to it, that can seem like the easy thing to do, to say we've now ticked off and done another kilometre of cycle route, or we've now effectively spent X amount more money, but it's the outcome that's being missed in that conversation. Years ago, there was major issues with councils in England because there was this artificial sort of there was this artificial drive to say that they'd delivered X amount of or X miles of cycle lanes. So we had councils saying we've delivered 20 miles of cycle lanes. What they'd done is painted a white line on a road for 20 miles. And it was a ticking the box to comply with the target rather than thinking what the outcome is. And we need to get back to thinking, we need to have a hard, laser-like focus on what the outcome is when those investment decisions are made.
Totally with you. It's all about the outcomes-based accountability as such, and the outcome should be the amount of people on the path, not the length of miles it's done. There's nothing worse driving through the countryside, driving around potholes and a beautiful cycle path and walkway, which I'm all for, and not anybody on it. It's not a good outcome. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Absolutely, last is Andrew.
I'll be brief, Chair. Just picking up on another potholes, bikes, safe for cars, safe for bikes. Discuss. I mean, do you find? I mean, I'm the wrong person to ask about risk and safety, but I mean, yeah.
You're fundamentally right. You know, if you're going to have people cycling on roads, potholes are much more dangerous for them than drivers. The reality of what is trying to be achieved in Northern Ireland is getting new people cycling for everyday journeys. That's going to start with kids. That's going to start with people commuting to work. That's not probably not going to have a mass movement to lycra clad, £2,000 bike users going cycling all the way from Downpatrick to Belfast. I don't know if you do that yourself.
Not recently.
No. So yeah, that's why our focus and the focus should be on creating those protected, segregated cycle lanes. The question you got to ask yourself is, would I let my 5-year-old use this route? And I think almost every time the answer is probably no. So that's what we're fundamentally pushing for.
Just I know Mr. McHugh raised a point, and again I would echo it regarding the rural nature. Again, listening to what was said, it did seem very much, and again one can only presume the biggest concentration population is Belfast, ergo that's where you put it. And again, as someone that has cycled through Belfast politely, you could say it's a challenge. Realistically, as a cyclist, it's a battle. You get abuse hurled at you, quite literally. But again, going back to the point, I mean, how do you see the strategy for, and you've touched on it with traffic calming measures, and I get that, but how do you see the strategy for, because again, people in South Down, I'm sure as Mr. McHugh, people all the way across in the west and Strabane, Castlederrick direction, they want to see safe routes for their 5-year-olds. So if the strategy is to put it all in a big, say like a big ticket, 15k, what is the strategy then? Is it to run concurrently? Or let's get the big ticket and then we'll move on to the smaller ticket, or the more out of the way bits? Sorry.
Firstly, it doesn't have to be Belfast. Is the first point. It doesn't have to be the
No,
biggest.
I appreciate. I'm just hypothesizing here.
And you could choose that you're going to focus initially on a number of larger settlements. My point was, if you're thinking you're going to do it in Belfast plus 42 all at the same time, that's not going to work with the level of money you've got. So some decision needs to be made about prioritisation. You can phase things, and you can say this is what we want to do in phase 1, and this might be what we want to do in phase 2. And so people, those towns and places in phase 2, know they're not being completely forgotten about. And you can think about what else you might do, which is not creation of substantial, more costly infrastructure in some of those other places. Is that a town where you're reducing the town centre speed limit to 20 miles per hour, or where you're preventing through traffic on a particular road through the town centre, where you're pedestrianising one particular part of that town centre? There are things that you can do which are cheaper and which have a local benefit in those particular places, and that's certainly something that could be considered. What we were concerned about is the draft did rather look like we're going to do a little bit of cycle lanes everywhere, and that feels to us problematic.
No, it's just an observation, just that point you made about the Manchester Bean network in 2019, to get all that, to see where we're at. I mean, it's depressing, really. To be, I mean, it's and then you look across, as you drive, when you go through to Scotland, and you see where it's done well in towns, whatever, and they've seemed to have really embraced the bike right the way through, from big cities to small towns. So,
just on the Greater Manchester point, just sorry to interrupt, but that is not all central Manchester. Greater Manchester, there's Manchester City, and then there are 10 boroughs, and there are towns like Bolton and Wigan and Bury. So that's the greater area, and that is across the entirety of that area, not just the city centre.
But it's comparable to,
What I would say, to maybe try and finish on a positive, there's a lot of audit office reports that and even the recent road maintenance issues that just seem insurmountable. This is something that can change. It can change quite quickly. It can change within a single electoral cycle. We don't need to wait decades, but it has to be, you have to be prioritised in what you do. You have to be accountable for what you do, and you have to be engaged in stakeholders. But if you do those three things, but by the time we're back in the chamber, maybe in another 4 or 5 years, we should see examples of where differences have been made and more people are walking and cycling. It is a challenge that actually you can address.
Okay.
Sounds like a positive note to finish on. Well done, Andrew. I don't have any other indications. I think everyone, it's been a mammoth session. Thank you so much, Duncan and Andrew, for your time today. It's been really, really useful. In terms of actions, Michael, anything from that we want to?
There was nothing proposed from members during the session, and there was no additional information offered. So unless there's anything that members have.
Nope. That's okay. Listen, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Committee, it is 5 to 12. I suggest we take a couple of minutes and we pause committee, and we'll come back on at 12 to take evidence from the DFI officials, if that's okay.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.
Oh.
So I'd like to welcome the officials from the Department for Infrastructure. We've just had a very interesting session, obviously, with Cycling UK. We are getting increasingly, I think, pressed for time, although I do obviously like to worry the Education Committee Chair because they need the room at 2 o'clock. But I'm going to open it up to Peter and Joanne for an initial presentation, but then would also appeal to you. There'll probably be a whole range of questions. If you can make your answers as focused as you could, that would be really useful, because in all seriousness, we probably need to close at least this down in the next 45 minutes to an hour to give us time to get through the rest of the stuff we have to do today. But Peter, happy to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks members for giving us the opportunity to present on the Active Travel Delivery Plan today. I'll start with a bit of background. So, well, as we heard earlier on today, urban bicycle network plans formed part of the build pillar within the Changing Gear strategy that's been out since 2015. It's fair to say that the increased investment within the Climate Change Act in 2022 has led to a renewed impetus with respect to active travel and investment in active travel and our plans with respect to that. And what we did then as part of this in 2023 was that we started to work on the draft active travel delivery plan, which we've heard about earlier, so I won't go into too much detail. When it's complete and when it's finalised, it'll complement the Belfast Cycling Network Delivery Plan and the Strategic Plan for Greenways to provide us with a firm basis for prioritisation and delivery of active travel over the next decade and beyond. Just very quickly about the consultation process, and the dates are there. We decided to hold a grand launch event for it to try to generate interest in it. And we were very thankful. We had speakers, two ministers, Minister for Health and Minister for Infrastructure, John O'Dowd at the time. We also had an international perspective from the Dutch Cycling Embassy speak at that launch event, and we had subject matter experts on health and transport. There was TV and local media interest in it, which we were very thankful for. And apart from that launch event and the consultation, we also went round every council area during the consultation period and held public engagement events. We also held an online seminar, and we held focused engagement events with particular groups. So we met with representatives of older people and people with disabilities. We met with university planning students to try to get a younger person's perspective. And we also had a technical talk with the Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation. Those efforts resulted in 346 responses to the consultation, almost 300 from individuals and 53 from organisations, including the likes of councils and interested parties like Cycling UK, Walkwheel Cycle Trust, MTAC, RNIB, Guide Dogs. So the first thing we asked about within our consultation was with respect to prioritisation. So this is this prioritisation framework that we heard about earlier, and we were quite clear that we felt the most valuable journeys to prioritise in terms of routes were to consider connections to schools, to public transport interchanges, and to town centres. So that's a clear prioritisation framework, and you can see on the slide that what we've boiled that down to then over the last year or so to try to make it meaningful for people is the idea of people, places and provision. So how many people will a project connect? Give them the opportunity to make use of the infrastructure investment. What places does it connect those people to with that weighted priority towards those particular connections? And the level of provision. So we're trying to make that idea of prioritisation and a clear prioritisation framework on that basis. We then went on to talk about design principles, and we asked 2 questions around that as to whether our designs should be people-centred with the aim of creating places that are welcoming and accessible to all. And you can see there that with very high support for that principle, and the principle of provision of high quality infrastructure that's appropriate to the situation with safety at its heart, and again, very high levels of support for that principle. Now, within the consultation responses, there was calls for stronger, clearer definitions and practical standards to ensure that these principles are meaningfully applied. And we have carried out a lot of work and a lot of review of best practice guidance across these islands, and 2 of the key documents that we will apply to our designs going forward are there. Cycling by Design is the Transport Scotland guidance for cycling, and inclusive mobility guidance is the key UK guidance document with respect to pedestrian accessibility and inclusivity within streets. We then went on to ask some questions about road space allocation and rethinking traffic management, and again you can see there that there was high support for this ideal and the idea of rebalancing the street. What we're talking about there is you look at a street in cross section from building line to building line, and you consider the space that's required by each user group in that street, concentrating on those most vulnerable users first. So what we're talking about there are people pushing prams, wheelchair users, pedestrians. What space do those people need in the street first? Then, if we're considering introducing cycling within the street, how much space, safe space is required to enable safe cycling infrastructure within the street, and so on and so on. And then, if there isn't enough space within the cross section of a street, we also then ask the question about, well, can we rethink traffic management? Can we look at reducing speed limits? Can we look at one-way systems? Things like that. Is the public open to those types of ideas in order to try to make our streets more people-centred? And you can see there was strong support for that in principle. Finally then, we proposed draft network plans and draft priority routes within those network plans. So not only did we say, here are all the routes within every settlement that if it was all delivered, it would be a clear, comprehensive network. We did set out what we could deliver over the first 10 years, reasonably, with a reasonable expectation of future budgets, and those future budgets being a commitment to meet the Climate Change Act objective of 10% spend by 2030, and then continuing at that level. And that is meaningfully what we believe that we could deliver within a 10-year period within that. Now, finally then, just next steps. So following feedback from committee today, and taking your views on board, we would intend and hope to finalise our plan in the coming months, present it for ministerial approval and publication. And then we will commence work on tranche 1 of the schemes. So I think you heard earlier on today about the BNAC network and what they could do within 5 years. And it was a problem that we faced in the Belfast Cycling Network Delivery Plan that was published in 2022. It does take 2 or 3 years to bring a programme of schemes from inception through to construction. I think we're talking in the B network from 2019 to 2024, which is a 5-year period to bring a programme of schemes from inception to construction, and talked about an individual scheme of 6.5 miles long that was delivered in that time as well. So these things don't happen overnight. There are TRO processes associated with them. There are objections, meaningful objections that need to be dealt with on any individual scheme, and there's the whole process of bringing in secondary legislation to legislate cycle routes to make sure that people aren't parking on them, things like that. So really, just to finish up, I suppose, we are committed, our department is committed to delivering schemes that matter most to people, and we will be engaging with the public on an ongoing basis through the implementation phase after the plan is finalised and published. So thanks very much for listening to me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for that presentation. I'm going to kick off, look, in terms of the stakeholder engagement, obviously Cycling UK raised the issue. I think Andrew best phrased it, that is, whenever this started, his son was just born and now he's 3. There's this period, Peter, between 23 and 26. Can you detail, obviously, our understanding from what you said at the committee last time was that there will be this stakeholder engagement forum, whatever, is starting in May. Can you just briefly say what happened between 23 and 26? It does seem quite a long time, I guess, for something to be put in place that would capture the views of stakeholders, just in general terms.
So from 2023 through 2024 was the development of the draft plan. So we did engage with local councils, we engaged with particular user groups and things like that in the development of the draft plan that then went to, there's a lot of transport planning work goes into that. There's a lot of number crunching and things like that to come up with network plans. That was 2023, 2024. And then we launched the public consultation in, I'm sorry, I've closed my presentation down now, November 2024.
Yep.
And that ran through to the end of February last year.
Mm-hmm.
So what has happened in the last sort of 6 to 9 months on that really is the taking on board all the comments, you know, 346 respondents and things like that, and amending network plans based on the local engagement that we had got from people during that consultation period and things like that. And it just takes that length of time to amend those local networks and to get ministerial agreement to the consultation response report, which we published, or which we sent to yourselves in November last year. And then this has been the first opportunity, you know, that we had the session about. So in terms of timeline, you're talking months lost, okay, but steps along the way.
Yeah, like I think I get that. I'm trying to be fairly balanced with this. I think, you know, given the nature of it, and I don't want to assume what the policies and procedures are within the department for how you consult or how you engage. My understanding from my experience within the department is you sort of can do. I'm just sort of, my reflection would be in that time period, and it's not a question, it's more of a statement. You know, I suppose my understanding would be reaching out to sort of key bodies, even for advice, even if it's, you know, vaguely consultative, even if it's just for asking for opinions around stuff that's being drafted. What that does is it gets those people on board to a level, you know, they may not like what your response is, you know, but you're asking for their opinion, and I think that's a useful step maybe for the department to reflect in terms of how it engages in the future. But I'll park that one there. Next one is the urban and rural balance. So it's just on the core that we got back in. As you reflected on the responses from the consultation, there's a bullet point here: the need to balance investment in urban and rural areas. Just a little bit more detail around what that looks like.
Yep. So the active travel delivery plan is the plan for urban settlements. That's why we used that 5,000, and we heard earlier on today that there's a view that is spreading the jam too thinly. What good active travel infrastructure looks like in a rural settlement can be quite different. Mm-hmm. So in a larger, more urban settlement, the opportunities for cycling to be an attractive mode of transport are greater than they would be in a village where to walk from one side of it to the other maybe takes you 15 minutes. You know, so and
it's probably a 30 mile an hour speed limit as well, which is a little bit safer.
You know, so what good active travel infrastructure looks like in a rural environment is quite different. And what we had to do first of all was within the urban environment, so within the larger towns, we needed to work out what a good active travel network would look like at that slightly larger scale.
Okay, no, that's absolutely, that's fine. I'm sure we'll hear some more about that. Final one from me, in terms of the department taking forward some of these plans, and whatever they look like in terms of the schemes themselves, and I'm not going to get into the minutiae, I'm sure somebody else might pick it up about I think you used the phrase spreading the jam a little thin, what these actual schemes will look like in terms of, I think they're called the Tranche 1 schemes, is that right? Yeah, so far so good. Okay, so it's probably just coming slightly from the other side of the argument, and that is, if you identify Tranche 1 and you're going to put a cycle lane, along a road that has lots and lots of houses on it, I guess what's from a constituent perspective, I mean, if constituents maybe go, well, actually, I prefer that not to be there, it's taking away my, car parking, or it's making it more difficult, in terms of how they go about, what recourse do they have in terms of feeding into what happens next, or is that sort of stopped now that the consultation is over?
Well, the consultation and the finalisation of the priority routes, that'll set out, what we intend to do over the next 10 years across those settlements. Now, within each individual council area then, each individual council area probably has a couple of towns. Now, we could put all of our investment for the next 10 years into one of those two towns. But you can imagine what it's going to be like when I go to Derry and Strabane Council and suggest they spend all their money in Derry and don't put any into Strabane. Or if I go to Ards and North Down and say, spend all the money in Bangor for the next 10 years and don't worry about Newton Ards. So whilst there may be an argument for that from a technical point of view, the reality of it is that I don't think any of our elected representative groups are in that space. So what we have to do then within an individual settlement is that we have to look at the individual schemes that have the greatest benefit, and that's what we're going to be trying to do with our Tranche 1 schemes, is to show people here are the benefits that can accrue if you invest in this, if you make walking and cycling a more attractive option for people. And then the hope is from that the acceptance of the schemes or support for these schemes will grow.
Yeah, no, look, that's fine. That certainly explains it. I mean, I just on a reflection before I bring in the deputy chair. I mean, I think it was something as soon as we grew up, we all used active travel. I mean, my generation, because I'm so archaically old, but that's what we did. We all had bikes. We cycled places. We cycled to school. We ran around the streets in uncoordinated chaos. And I think what we have seen, and I think as either Andrew or Duncan mentioned it, we are a car-heavy society, something along those lines, and our children, seem to be slightly more compressed into their homes, and certainly my experience was, and I do not doubt. I mean, any health, and it's not just health benefits from active travel. There's a whole range of benefits for my Zach and P6. It's about confidence. Whenever we said, yeah, you can cycle to school, he was like, really? And, he crosses two roads. But, that's a big deal for him. And I think what we want to do is see good schemes come forward, that do, particularly, as like Andrew pointed out, particularly for young people, that facilitate hubs, spokes, whatever it looks like to, get to schools, especially the primary school age. I think that's really pivotal. I'll stop there, try to live by my own rules, and bring in the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. And Peter and Joanne, thank you very much for your patience today and for the presentation and answers so far. Look, I don't think any of us expected to be perfect from day one, and I know this is a process that you've been given, and I know it's going to evolve over time. But what we did here previous to yourselves, as you'll be aware, is a pretty damning assessment from Cycling UK on the back of a pretty damning report from the Northern Ireland Audit Office. So my first question is just around how are you going to take stock of and resolve the main issues that have been highlighted from the likes of stakeholders like Cycling UK and the report from the Northern Ireland Audit Office that have point out key failures up to now, particularly around a strategic and coordinated reply. Are you confident that the consultation and the work that's going to be done is going to lead to resolutions of the problems that have been highlighted to date?
Okay, I'll start with the Audit Office report. So we, Minister, welcomed the responses to the Audit Office report, and so did I personally anyway. In a sense, the Audit Office report, the recommendations with it were all things that we would want to do anyway, and that we were planning to do and hoping to do. So to have the Audit Office reinforce that is a very powerful and useful thing for us to have. They rightly pointed out that we haven't yet reached agreement with all our stakeholders with respect, in particular, with respect to what we constitute as active travel spend. And we draw back to the first presentation again, you know, we believe, and the department's position is that fixing and lighting footways is beneficial, primarily beneficial for pedestrians and cyclists, and that's why they've been included in our calculations of where we are. We might never reach agreement with all our stakeholders on that, but it won't be for the want of trying.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Moving on to then the stakeholder engagement forum, I suppose, which is really useful because it is integral to all this that we have complete buy-in, maybe not always agreement, but buy-in into a process and properly engagement. It's clearly not really worked up to this point. There hasn't been that level of engagement. I think we can all accept that. How do you see that evolving? How do you see the stakeholder engagement group working? How do you see it shaping policy going forward? And where does it sit whenever we compare it to engagement and overlap with local councils and other government departments?
Yep. Okay, so the governance arrangements that we're setting up is that there will be a programme board for the delivery of active travel, and that's the decision-making body with a senior responsible officer in charge of it, which is a director within the department. The stakeholder forum and the local council engagement forum will sit below that level, and will the board will take the views of the forums and will seek their opinions on things, and that will help to inform policy. That's the simple layout of it, but I do hope that ourselves in Cycling UK and MTAC and the Walkwheel Cycle Trust, we all have shared aims, we all have shared objectives, and we generally work positively together to try to further those aims. And I hope the Stakeholder Engagement Forum will be a vehicle that strengthens that partnership. Okay, in terms of the chair or overseeing that, you said it would be somebody internally, likely at director level. Do you think, Peter, there's any argument, and I'm swayed by the notion, that it might be an independent chair, somebody who can bring all stakeholders together given the level of overlap between this, or potentially an active travel champion who could be, like other areas, a key czar whenever overseeing this and bringing everyone together rather than an internal departmental role? Yeah, it is an interesting point, John. It isn't the model that we've set up. Okay, I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, is there any scope to look at it? I'm not saying that it doesn't have value. Yeah. You know, I do know that there are independent commissioners for a number of things in Northern Ireland. And I'm not just suggesting a commissioner for the sake of it, by the way. Active travel would be a pretty niche one to set up. You know, a commissioner for infrastructure delivery or something potentially, but I don't know if an individual commissioner for active travel. So where people think commissioner, they think money. Massive office, huge staff and massive budget. I'm not suggesting that. I'm maybe talking like an active travel champion, somebody the way with digital champions, somebody who can bring things together, not with a massive expense to the public purse, but maybe somebody outside the department. I think other regions do it that way, or certainly other areas. I'm just wondering if you thought it wasn't looked at, it would add any more benefit to it in bringing people together and keeping people on their toes. I wouldn't personally have an opinion on it, to be honest. Okay. Except to say that I'll answer to any master. Okay.
The final one then for me at this stage is just around the ongoing consultation around the plan and how this all links up to public transport as well, because I think we'll expect people to maybe walk and maybe then cycle and then maybe get the train. So how is that being done in working with TransLink and working with other organisations providing community transport, for example, and public transport, and how do you see that linking up?
So, well, at the active travel delivery plan level, linkages to public transport interchanges are one of the key priorities. So we also work directly with TransLink, and TransLink being part of the departmental budget, some of TransLink spend is on active travel, and the idea of that is that they would invest in, for example, if you're talking about cycling, they would invest in secure cycle storage at their origin train stations for the first mile journey, and then at the destination train stations, the likes of Belfast Grand Central Station, a bike share scheme might be more valuable. So the likes of linking up Belfast bikes with Grand Central Station and then access to Belfast City Centre, that's more or less the Dutch model of multimodal journeys, as opposed to some other countries, like I think Denmark, for example. They invested quite heavily in allowing people to bring their own bikes onto trains, but that was fell foul of its own success, because sooner or later you run out of space whenever it becomes successful. Whereas the Dutch model, there are some train stations in the Netherlands that have 5,000 bike parking spaces in them, and it's scalable.
Okay. And we have seen that at some of the local stations, but less so park and rides, for example. So maybe that's something that might evolve over time as well.
Well, it will evolve over time. That's the model that we're aiming for those multimodal journeys.
Okay. I've got a few more, but I'll probably wait till later on because I'm conscious of time. So thank you, folks.
No, thank you, John, for parking those. We'll see how we get on. 12:30. Harry, you're next.
Thank you very much.
No, pleasure, Harry. Pleasure.
In terms of your consultation, was it always, like sometimes a consultation, you mentioned the groups of people that you met and was done with, but would areas ever be visited where the need actually would be, would you be talking to locals where they could tell you, look, there's a need here and connectivity? I'll just go on a wee bit and then you can. And also, whenever some of the paths and stuff are put up, we don't want them to be put up where it's handy. Again, we want them put up where the need is. I did like your connections to schools, interchanges, town centres and people centre. That's most important. But again, as I say, it's one thing deciding right and then going to an area, but that area needs, the need needs to be greater. Is that okay? Thank you.
No, Harry. So look, I'll start off with our approach to try to get that local voice during the consultation on the active travel delivery plan, and then Joanne can come in to explain a wee bit about what we intend to do with regards to meaningful engagement on schemes, on individual schemes that fall out of the active travel delivery plan. So as well as the launch event and the consultation and information on the website and things like that to try to get the general public, we went out to every council area. So we had at least one event in each council area, and the main purpose of those events was to try to get that local voice. So I always use Argent North Down as an example of this, because the Argent North Down Cycle Group were very considered and very positive in terms of their engagement with us. I think we spent maybe 2 or 3 hours with Andrew McLean and a number of members of the group going through the network plans in significant detail, and we did make changes. They proposed changes. We had to go back to the transport planners, run those numbers through the system, checked out whether it's still, with regards to our prioritisation framework, whether the suggestions stacked up quantitatively, but by and large they did. So where we could, we have made amendments to the network plans based on local information that we received. But I think, Joanne, if you want to speak about the...
Yes, so in terms of then the individual routes that we're bringing forward, we are trying to embed stakeholder engagement right throughout that design process. So at the very earliest stage, a key bit of drawing up an engagement plan, so identifying all stakeholders that we want to engage with, looking at how we will do that, and then bringing forward initial engagement around preliminary design stage, with a public engagement event associated with that to allow people in the area to come give us their views that we can take on and take through then to detailed design. And we're also looking at ways that we can engage maybe other groups. So where there's schools along the route, how do we engage younger people in that? And we're exploring ways that we can do that. And then there's also, in the statutory process stage, when we come to TRO, another engagement event, so statutory consultation, but another engagement event to allow people to come in again, view the final proposals, and we can again amend designs based on anything that we hear there, should it be appropriate.
Yep, very good. And moving on, 42 urban settlements. Did you feel there were any left out?
Well, we had to split it somewhere. So there is the view that you should concentrate all your investment in the 4 or 5 most largest and most dense populated areas, you know, and then there's the counter view that is everyone's a stakeholder and there should be regional balance and fairness right down to the individual. Within the active travel delivery plan, we had a clear urban-rural split, and 42 towns is the NISRA statistics for the urban settlement limit. And as I say, when you get below that and your settlement size starts to get smaller, cycling becomes less, on a settlement, shorter everyday journeys basis, cycling becomes less of an attractive option, because walking is a perfectly attractive option. If you can get to your local school and your local shop and the doctors in the village or whatever, all within a 10-minute walk, a 2 to 3 minute cycle, is it worth investing in segregated cycling facilities in that village? Or are you better off spending money on reduced speed limits, traffic calming measures, additional pedestrian crossings, things like that that make the streets safer for people to walk around?
Yep. And I think we nearly need to consider putting roofs on our cycle paths at the moment.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thanks,
thank
Chair.
you. No, thank you, Harry. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming in as well today. Just to touch on something you mentioned there, Peter, about the regional balance piece, just to be devil's advocate for a second. I've had MLAs in this building come to me and talk to me quite disparagingly about works that they're seeing in their local areas in terms of like ring roads and stuff like that. And I fear that if we spread ourselves too thin, spreading the jam, I think was said in the last session, we're kind of losing those naysayers who may see active travel schemes popping up that start at a strange location and finish at a strange location, and they're not really used that much as well. We've seen examples of this in Belfast. I'm thinking particularly about on the Dublin Road. I think there was a lot of confusion about a cut-off for cycling in terms of a temporary scheme, I think it was at the time. It kind of started nowhere, finished really nowhere. I'd been on it myself before as well. I think that we're maybe losing the active travel sector a little bit if we spread ourselves too thin with those minor schemes. But we're also losing those people who may not be supportive of active travel in the grand scheme of things. We heard previously about Luxembourg and I think Greece from Andrew. How do you take that? How do you kind of square that circle of 42 locations across Northern Ireland, which may create more minor schemes in comparison to one location which is all singing, all dancing, and is something for other areas to look at and say, geez, I really want that?
Yep. Okay, Peter. So look, we're not talking about a large number of minor schemes. The priority routes, the point of the active travel delivery plan rightly acknowledges that previous to that, schemes were prioritised using a different matrix, and they were prioritised at a divisional level as well. So there wasn't a centralised plan for what we were to do. There was, based on requests from the public or whatever other reasons, there was a prioritisation matrix within each of the different areas. That's what we've moved away from with the active travel delivery plan. So everyone can see where we're going to be spending our money over the next 10 years whenever they see the plan, and that you will see that those routes are in the settlements, and they're being prioritised on the basis of connecting the greatest number of people to the most beneficial places. So I would challenge anyone on our first tranche schemes when they see them in the coming months to say that there are schemes to nowhere. They aren't in that plan, and each of the projects within the plan are probably in the region on average of a couple of £1 million per scheme. So it isn't a case of spending £50,000 in this settlement and £100,000 there to produce low quality infrastructure that it has been shown in the past not to be beneficial in encouraging more people to see active travel as an alternative.
There, Peter, about in the next 10 years. But as I look back on the last 10 years and being a local councillor in terms of how Belfast has gone, how confident are you that how it's gone in Belfast over the last 10 years, where we've seen various schemes being held up, taking a very long time? How confident are you, based off that experience, that the next 10 years will be better and faster?
Well, we have more resources working on, if we focus down into Belfast and the Belfast Cycle Network. So the Belfast Cycle Network Delivery Plan was published in 2022. So that's just short of 4 years ago. We have delivered some schemes on it already. One of the first ones was the Cumber Greenway lighting, Lagan Gateway, Forth Meadow Greenway. We currently have 3 schemes on the ground out of that short-term list. So we've got Island Street on the ground, we've got Laganmore Avenue, and we've got West Belfast Greenway Phase 1A. So we're starting to see those schemes. We also have a number of schemes that are in the middle of the statutory process. And the statutory processes are really important. It might be frustration from a point of view of somebody who wants to get something built, and from a point of view of somebody who wants to, who has to manage the budgets of getting built. But at the same time, the public have a right to object to proposals, and that's what those statutory processes are for. So it does take time, and it takes time working closely with individual objectors and things like that to try to resolve those. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But some of the schemes that you're talking about that have taken longer, that's the reason. But we are bringing forward in the next month or two, there's going to be significant milestones reached on the likes of the Dublin Road Botanic. You mentioned Dublin Road. There will be holding a public information event on that scheme, and we're also going to be bringing forward the Ravenhill Road scheme through to the TRO process. So these are big, impactful. Each of those schemes are at least a couple of £1 million each that are going to be coming forward in the coming months. That's how long it takes to bring these schemes forward, unfortunately.
You may be mindful there of so I lived in France for a while, and whenever COVID happened, Paris just went out and just changed everything. I've been back since, and it's completely different from what I remember whenever I lived there. Famously, on Hill Street, we put down some cones. People drove over the cones, and we didn't really do that much when there was a really unique opportunity there with less people on the roads. I'm totally supportive of people having the right to object and to not be supportive of something. But perfection and getting everybody on board sometimes is the enemy of the good and the greater of what are we actually trying to achieve here.
Well, I look forward to this committee having that view whenever we bring forward pieces of TROs.
I'm always happy to,
objections.
but do you not think though that sometimes trying to please absolutely everybody can slow down what you yourselves are trying to achieve? Getting more people cycling, 1% of journeys, I think, it's the figure that's been for the last while. If we make it easier, the example I always talk about is during COVID at Knock Junction in East Belfast, seeing 2 parents out with 2 kids. I haven't seen that since, because parents are terrified bringing their children out onto the roads. So what you're both trying to achieve is good, but if we need to show leadership, I suppose, is the point that I'm trying to make, and that this is a really good thing that you're both trying to do. Getting absolutely everybody fully supportive and not having the process frustrated is what I think we should be going
Yeah,
with.
Peter, look, just to assure you that it's not the case that if we receive an objection that means the scheme is shelved indefinitely. That's definitely not the case. But we do try our best to resolve material objections before we would bring TRO to yourselves for approval.
Yeah. And then just lastly, you'd mentioned about obviously being in front of the committee today, finalising the plans, and then bringing it to the Minister for approval. What's the kind of timeline there? Because I heard finalisation and I thought that sounds vague. And then bringing it to the Minister, and I know ministers have constrained time and things like that. What's the sort of rough timeline moving forward from today?
Go for it, Joanne. Joanne's in charge of it.
There you go.
Yeah, I think what we're looking probably is then the finalising of the wording probably to the Minister in late March, and publication in April would be what we're aiming for at the minute.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thank you, folks. I'll not keep you too long, and appreciate you were listening into the earlier briefing, so I'll not rehearse all of the points made. But just keen to get a wee bit of clarity just around what's been referred to more probably in the written evidence about reinterpretation of active travel spending. That terminology. You heard my view earlier. I'm clear that in order to encourage active travel, we need safe roads, and we need working street lights and safe footpaths as well. So I suppose just keen to get a bit of clarity on the position on that from you.
Okay, so the Climate Change Act coming in, for the first time the department had to properly consider how much it spent on active travel. And we had to look at the wording of the Act, and the wording of the Act specifically talked about overall transport budgets. So that pushed us to look at not only capital, which is what the capital budgets that we talk about for developing the network. Yeah. We had to look at the resource budgets of the department, because the wording of the law says the overall budget. And that meant that once we started to then look at all those different activities, line by line, and the rule of thumb that we used in the consideration of that line by line was, is this activity primarily for the benefit of pedestrians and cyclists? And that was the measure that we used to determine whether we considered something to be active travel or not. Yeah. So, for example, your potholes and road resurfacing, yeah. Primarily, whenever you consider that about 1% of the journeys on roads are by cycling, can you really say that fixing a pothole on a carriageway is primarily for the benefit of the cyclist? But if you're looking at a footway defect or overgrown hedges that mean somebody pushing a pram has to go out onto the road to get past it, is that maintenance investment primarily for a pedestrian and cyclist? And that's the measure we used. So it is, there are arguments around, you could argue, well, 1% of the carriageway resurfacing budget should therefore be counted as active travel because 1% of the journeys are cycle journeys. But I think if the Audit Office had a view that some of our things could be perceived to be window dressing, I think if we started going down to that, probably the most controversial one was the idea of street lighting. And we believe that we took a fairly conservative approach to that, to attribute 50% of the street lighting budget to active travel. Whenever you consider that about more than 80%, I believe, of street lights are in built up areas where there are footways and things like that. Yeah. That's the primary purpose of the street lighting, is for the amenity of pedestrians walking at night. Cars have headlights. Cars on rural roads have full beam. It's the main purpose, the principal purpose of street lighting since Roman times has been for the amenity of people walking in streets at night.
Yeah, and safety as well. It has to be paramount, and
absolutely,
I fully support that. It was just to go back to the point briefly about the roads. But would you agree that the poor and dangerous condition of roads does discourage active travel? I've heard that from constituents, and we see it every day. Where there is that real risk to life in some cases, given the scale of the problems on our roads on this crisis.
No, I would absolutely agree with that, and the severity when a cyclist or a motorcyclist hits a pothole versus the severity of generally if a car hits a pothole. You know, there's no comparison there, so I
Well, you have
disagree with that.
we'll have had exceptional periods of heavy rainfall, you know, over the last 6 weeks, you know, record over 140 years, I believe. So, you know, I think that there is a case for, you know, some flexibility to get the basics right, you know, and that's certainly I'm firmly of that opinion, to make our roads safe for all users, and very much including active travel within that. I think that if those foundations aren't right, you know, I think we'll not get the right trajectory on active travel ultimately.
Just one wee thing that I would like to mention on that as well. The refocusing within the department on active travel and on pedestrian and cycling safety that came about as the Climate Change Act, you know, it does allow us for not a lot of extra money to make a big difference to some really easy bread and butter issues like overgrown hedges, you know, verge creep that comes out in and narrows a footway, reduces the use, those types of things. But by being able to acknowledge, recognise and quantify the money that you spend in those areas as active travel, it helps to highlight all those different benefits for all those different people.
Yeah, and there's a focus on cars, but there's so many people that don't have access to cars, you know, through a whole range of circumstances, and that, you know, they need to be considered as well. And the points about hedges is something very common, you know, within my certainly role, you know, and no, I appreciate the work you're doing. So look, thanks for that, folks. I'm conscious of time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just trying not to be too long or long-winded, just to pick up on one of the things you said, and again touching back into more rural areas and different approaches to it. You mentioned the process for developing one-way schemes, and I mean that has been mentioned, albeit sort of blue sky thinking in some regards. But what is the process for that? You know, I mean, again, you can see how that would affect rural roads and in sort of locations where you could link things up, and actually it does seem like a sensible way to increase it. So what is the process for that?
So what we asked within the consultation was, should we, whenever we're looking at an active travel scheme, should we try to rebalance the street on the basis of considering the needs of the most vulnerable users first and then working in? And sometimes within the cross section of a street you will get to a certain point where there's no room left, and whenever you get into that, only when you get into that situation generally is when you would want to start to consider, well, if we haven't got enough room for 2 lanes of traffic in both directions, is it a case of 1 lane of traffic in each direction, or is it a case of 2 lanes of traffic in a one-way circulatory system? You know, it was really asking for the public's opinion on whether they believed that was a viable thing for designers to consider. So it's really more in a settlement environment, Andrew, rather than introducing one-way roads in a rural environment, if that makes sense.
But how would one go about? How could the general public say, here's an idea in the blue skies thinking sense of the word, and then actually that makes sense? How would you go about?
Well, whenever we bring forward our individual projects, our tranche 1 projects, we will have our initial thoughts so that we'll have something to talk about, but we want to bring the schemes forward to get the public's view at a really early stage, rather than potentially designing up a final scheme and then somebody comes at the last minute and says, have you thought about doing this, or why don't you do that instead? So we want to get the public's view at an early stage in scheme development. So I hope you'll see, whenever we start bringing the individual schemes forward, that there will be the opportunity for those types of suggestions to be taken on board.
Just again, going through the responses, some of them had a very clear ratio of high responses, high agree, low disagree, but then equally there was a lot of responses there that had maybe not quite so many responses, and then in those ones there was a bit more of a balance between agree, disagree. Just wondering what the approach is going to be with those whenever they come to being reflected on, progressed on, developed.
Well, in terms of the main in terms of the main principles of how we're going to go about developing the schemes, it was fairly clear endorsement on all of the main principles. When we got down into the individual settlements and whether you thought an individual route should be prioritised, that's where we got more of the nuanced. Some people didn't believe that to be the case, and where we looked through all of the responses, and where there was a clear view that for whatever reason the people in that town didn't think the high scoring scheme was valuable, we took that on board, and we re-looked at it, and we went, well, what could that reason be? And we tried to tease that out in the engagement that we had with the local people on the day. So we've amended plans, hearing the views of the local people who live in those towns, telling us that's not where you should be concentrating first, and we've taken that on board and we've made changes.
In the previous evidence, there was this propensity to cycle model, propensity to cycle tool.
Yep.
Has that, and that's with the DFI, has that been used in this regard as well?
It wasn't used when we developed the plan. So we realised in late 2023, early 2024 that we needed a plan, and we used our transport planning framework to commission transport planners to develop the plan. But over the intervening year and a half, we have also commissioned a separate piece of work to develop the propensity to cycle tool, because we knew that the active travel delivery plan was a proportionate piece of work to give us a basis to start with. But now that we're going to be looking at prioritising individual routes within each town, the propensity to cycle tool is one of the key tools that we're going to be using to determine the potential value and the potential benefit of an individual scheme. So we didn't have the tool in place then. It's just one of a number of key things that we've done over the last year and a half, so that just to try to give ourselves a good quantitative basis for the prioritisation of the individual schemes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Peter, you wanted for a quick one?
Yeah, just on that point that Andy raised there, how long does it take to apply the propensity to cycle tool? How long does it take to find out what the likelihood
it's basically the propensity to cycle tool is an app that draws on census data and a number of other data sets to determine what the likely popularity of a route would be based on how many people live in that area, where that route's going to, the density, things like that. And then you can apply a couple of different filters to it. So you can apply, well, based on the levels of cycling that we see in Northern Ireland today, how many people per day would we believe would use that route? If we had Dutch levels of cycling, how many people per day would that be? So it's a web-based app.
An app? Like an app makes, in my head, it feels you'll quickly just press a few buttons and it'll give you an answer. Will it not make sense to apply that now?
It's there, Peter. All the information's there for the entire road network of Northern Ireland now. So what we do is, whenever we're focusing down on a scheme, we look at that road and what the tool's telling us, and that information goes into the business case for that route and for that scheme.
Been applied to what we have today.
What I'm saying is it wasn't applied to the active travel delivery plan because we didn't have the tool when we developed the active travel delivery plan, but it's absolutely going to be used in bringing forward the tranche 1 schemes, bringing forward the priority routes. It's part of our toolkit for determining the business case justification for taking this scheme forward and not taking that scheme forward first.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Joanne and Peter, for coming to committee and presenting. Again, very, very useful session. Always very happy to have you guys over here and chatting about these things. So, look, thank you very much for your time today. So, in a sort of a back to the future way, I have to seek agreement that the evidence session we've just had is recorded by Hansard. If not, we'll have to put you in a DeLorean and send you back about an hour. People happy enough? Okay, so we're going to record that session using Hansard. Okay, so item 9. Oh, hold on. Actions. Michael, do you have anything from that?
I didn't pick any up from members or from information offered, so
that's fine. Members have anything particularly they want to raise? Action from? No. Okay. Sorry? Yeah. Item 9 is...
If members have any recommendations for changes to the plan.
Oh, jeez, yeah, of course. So, look, I'm quite conscious the department did flag up the fact that they wanted some feedback from this committee on the active travel delivery plan. Okay, well, I think it's in our. I actually think it's made. There's a reference made to it in the stuff that they sent across to us. So I'm conscious the committee will probably want to feed into that in some shape or format. It's up to the committee to decide if it does, and then how it does. Those are legitimate questions, but I'm sure Peter and Deirdre will take our feedback if we could come up with a committee response around it. It's not necessarily my job to draft or lead on this one, but I'm just going to open it up to members' views on that. John?
Yeah, we could probably spend a week discussing this. It's maybe worth having a little chat offline, or maybe setting up a separate discussion. Again, always conscious of time we get to this stage of the meeting. But the one thing I pointed out and that they'd be keen to discuss is that independent oversight or involvement.
The czar?
The czar.
I'm surprised at you, John, because you're normally fiscally pretty prudent. You want another czar?
Well, not necessarily with the same amount of powers potentially, but maybe we'll call them a champion.
Champion, as long as you're a voluntary champion, that's absolutely fine.
I'm not talking about a commissioner, but there are examples as where it's used.
Yeah.
I think there. While I get the arguments for having it internally, there is an element of marking one's homework when it comes to the delivery of this, and I think there could be merit in having someone with the expertise, the oversight, and the ability to bring all stakeholders, participants together in the best interests.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would even go close to getting committee support, but I do think there's merit in it, and I would be certainly interested to hear whether the ministers just considered it in discussions with their officials and whether they've looked elsewhere to see the benefits and features that it brings.
Well, we could ping that across the DFI, Michael, just asking, has a minister considered a appointment of some sort of czar? That's a legitimate question, which I'm sure I'll come back on. There's a couple of options here. I mean, what we maybe will do is just pick this up for 3 minutes offline at the end. I mean, I have an idea about how we try and bring this one to a conclusion. It's occurred to me, but I think probably best to do it offline at the end of the meeting. Just have a quick chat about that if members are content.
Just on that one, Chair, if we do that offline, then we'll have to bring
it back in again. Okay, so let's forget about the offline thing then. Let's just have it in open session. So are we content that, whether it's fair or not, to ask the committee staff to try and even summarise some of the views and discussions that we had today and reflect that back to the department? There'll be the Hansard, there'll be our questions. Is that fair to ask committee staff to do that, Michael? Or is that onerous as a draft?
If members have particular views as to what they might like to see in the draft, there were clear suggestions by Cycling UK about what they thought of the plan. It's whether members want to make firm adjustments to the plan. So if you wanted to feed that back to committee staff, rather than us present what we think.
Well, you'd have to present it to us, and then we'd have to. I understand what you're saying, but they'd have to come to us, and then the committee would have to say, "Yeah, that's okay." Okay. Well, look, we will in that case leave it. Members can feed in to committee staff if they have any particular things that they want. We'll give everyone a week to do that. Yeah. John, you're winding up. It's fine. Okay. So look, if people have particular things that they want to feed into that, let's get that to committee staff for next week. We'll see if we can get that brought back in even the week following, perhaps, and sort of summarise of that. Again, if we want as a committee to send that to the Minister and to the DFI, we'll have to get committee agreement for what's on that bit of paper. I don't think it's going to be massively controversial, but equally, that if it's from the committee, it needs to be agreed by the committee and it'll have to come through this committee. So we'll see if we can get a draft of all that sorted and get it back on and tabled, Harry.
Chair, could I just ask to be excused of finance?
Of course you can. Yep.
So
We're still
anything major.
Anything major, we'll give you a shout.
Okay, thank you.
For court, how many do we need?
We need 5.
5. Yeah, okay, sure.
Very quickly.
You're going very quickly. Militia, you staying? Good. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so.
Just to check, Chair, was there agreement on sending a letter to the department to ask about consideration of a champion?
Happy enough.
Yes.
Let's see what they think.
It's just, I suppose the budget constraints as well. I have to be mindful of. There's a great range of champions and commissioners and these days, but I'm not convinced it should be. It's the silver bullet for all the issues that we're currently facing. And there's been a bit of talk about it this week and the last few weeks in this place. I think we just have to be mindful of that.
I think it was a voluntary czar and it didn't cost anything, Stephen. That would be this. I think I made that joke to John, but I'm also very conscious. I made the point to John, but it was a serious one by me as well. I'm quite conscious that we have a lot of czars, a lot of champions, a lot of X and Y, and I think if somebody came forward and it was mainly voluntary, that's okay in terms of championing it. I just worry about given the pressure on budgets, even small spend is still spend that has opportunity costs attached to it. So when we spend, I don't know, 80 grand on a czar, that's 80 grand that's not going into our roads or not going into other things, So anyway, we'll see what comes back in terms of that one and see what the department thinks about it. Okay, so item 9 is the draft budget, and unfortunately, folks, there is stuff here that we need to have a look at, and it's important. So I'm going to flag up some of the stuff that I have. I'm more than happy to take anything else that other people have as well, but it's at the clerk's memos at page 299, the draft budget response from the departments at page 303. Translink's response is 308, NIW's is 311, and Waterways Ireland is 315. So, look, I suppose the first thing to say is the content of the response that we've got really isn't properly sufficient for the committee to determine what the potential impacts of, in terms of service delivery, will be of the Department of Finance's draft budget. We can't call it the budget, it's the draft budget. Other budget terms are available, but it's certainly not agreed by the executive. There's a few things flowing out of the evidence, and I think it's worth me highlighting. I'll take anyone else's views on these or anything else that people have. From DFI's response, they stated that difficult decisions would be required to prioritise services and capital schemes within this 26-29 budget. Okay, but they don't actually say what those are, and they don't elucidate what their thinking is on that. So I would suggest one action to DFI would be writing back and saying, based on your earlier statement, what will this proposed allocation, which is 26-29 budget, support, and what are the difficult decisions that the Minister thinks is required, and what is your reasoning behind that? Now, I know from being inside a department, all these conversations have already been had. They've done the finance within DFI will have done all the modelling, have got lists coming out the wazoo in terms of all this. So I wouldn't expect them to come back and say, well, we don't really know, because they absolutely do. But I suggest that is one question we could ask DFI, given some of the stuff we have come back with. I'll keep going and then I'll bring anyone in who wants to raise additional. Do not worry. On the TransLink stuff, TransLink are scheduled or will finish year end down 27 million, I think. They'll actually be minus 27 million. TransLink, and again, Michael or Phil will keep me right if I get some of these numbers wrong, but they have 10 million left in reserves, which means that they will be, according to my math, minus 17 million at year end. I don't know, TransLink are GoCo or something like that, aren't they? Yeah. So I would probably want to write to DFI and say, based on the information that we have, TransLink will be. Can GoCos go bankrupt? I don't know. Can they? Well, they'll be minus 17 down, even if they use all the reserves, which have been diminishing over the last 4 years from I think around 60.
Sure, if I could quickly come in on that.
Phil.
So essentially, TransLink are, because of their public service obligation funding, and then the concessionary fare funding, what they're saying in their response is that they're, because of the increasing demand for concessionary fares, which is not being funded through its allocation through the department, they are having to use their cash reserves, which is now bringing them into a position of a negative £27 million.
Yes.
But at the end of the year, because they've used their cash reserves to reconcile that, but ultimately they're still getting less, 27 million less than what they need. So they're having to draw on their reserves, which is then having an impact on the recommendations of an independent Treasury report, which says that they need 30 million for its cash.
Which is a percentage of their overall turnover every year, or whatever it is, that figure. Let's write to DFI and just say, ask for DFI's analysis of the figures that we have there. Phil, can GoCos go bust? What happens if they're minus 17 at the end of the year?
A GoCo is a government-owned company. In TransLink's case, I'm not sure it is.
It could be a funny thing. I know there's a couple of different versions of it.
Would be determined as a GoCo. TransLink, I think, is slightly different arrangements, but ultimately they do operate in a commercial environment, and so therefore they would be expected to, follow the same rules as other companies. Obviously, with public sector funding, that adds an extra level of complexity to it. But I think your suggestion of writing to the department to get a readout from them would be a good one.
I think it's absolutely legitimate to ask for the department's view on that and whether it plans to step in at any point. The only other thing I have is from the Northern Ireland Water evidence on the budget. At the end of their somewhat quite complicated evidence. In summary, I think they're probably saying we're in real trouble, would like some more money. But they also offered another session. They said they will come to committee and talk to us about it. And my view would be to probably take them up on the offer. This is the largest issue that this committee faces in terms of impact in Northern Ireland is wastewater, because its tentacles are stretching into other areas. I don't think that would be a waste of time having their senior team in and asking them a few questions and asking about the gap and if they have any ideas about how to bridge that gap and what those possibilities might be. I'm open to that. So those are my three. Has anyone got any issues with either writing to DFI about what the difficult decisions they're contemplating are, the TransLink, writing to DFI on TransLink and using its reserves and what their view is? Are they going to step in and put some sort of measure of intervention there, and then the other one is about maybe accepting Northern Ireland Water's offer of another session with the committee. Are people happy enough with those? Yeah. Okay. I'll open it up to anyone else now. Andrew.
Yeah, we don't disagree with sort of some things you said. Just sort of looking through it, and I think the DFI would go some way to addressing. I think going some way is another way of saying it's not going to meet. So that's obviously an issue there. Again, TransLink, I can't disagree. Whenever you read that 27 million and knowing that the reserve state that it's in, that doesn't seem terribly promising. Again, NI Waterways Ireland has clear implications, but the NI Water has not received that in big bold writing, has not received, and then you read through it and you sort of see the timeline that they set out what the utility regulator has sort of stated that they need. You read, I think it's on page 313, DFI planning assumptions flatlines, but yet the NI Water forecast nominal prices increases every time, and it just highlights the fact, again, to me, in those numbers, that we're not so much running to stand still as running to go backwards. And I mean, to just rehash the point that you made, our water infrastructure is quite, it's a terrible figure, it is spreading, and is pretty messily spreading itself everywhere. And be that societal, be that economic, be that environmental, it's just, it is the biggest issue that sometimes we're not talking about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, absolutely fine. Andrew, any other views on it? Andrew, do you want to propose anything from what you just said there? Is there anything you want to add to what I've suggested in terms of a specific? You're happy enough?
No, happy enough with what,
okay,
but I think it's just to highlight the point as you do, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Michael, did you get a reasonable summary of that, about what we're being asked to do there?
We did, yeah. So it's those questions around what priorities and what's the proposed allocation, how much that's going to cost, what's required, what prioritisation of that is for the department's allocation, Translink's financial situation, particularly it's expending its reserves, and then to invite NI Water for an oral session to talk about their money. NI Water have been quite up quite a lot talking about their money, so the committee might want to consider what we're going to ask that's specifically new, that they haven't told us already, but if that's the committee's will to have NI Water talk about that stuff, if there's any specific questions we have for them,
we'll come up with as well. If committee's happy enough, I think we probably reach out to them and say, thanks very much, you suggested you were coming to see us. We'll give that some thought. I have some new fresh questions I'd like to ask them. So fresh questions. So I think
fresh water, just fresh
water questions. I think that would be a useful probably session. So we'll see if they come through. Are members content with item 9? Happy enough? Agreed? Okay. Item 10 is an SL1, the Glencairn Road, Belfast, Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2026. At page 318 is the clerk's memo, at 320 is the SL1. Page 23 is the notice of intention. At page 324 is the explanatory memorandum. Page 326 is a draft order for the SR, and at page 328 is the map. The purpose of the proposed statutory rule is to abandon an area of 16,948 square metres of road at Glencairn Road, Belfast, extending from its junction with Wolf Hill Road for a distance of 950 metres in a westerly and then northerly direction. The proposed rule is subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly. The committee noted receipt of the SL1 and proposed SR at its meeting of the 21st of January 2026, at which point a call for views was published on the Assembly website. The committee's call for views closed on the 3rd of February 2026 and received no responses. No specific issues have been identified with the SR as drafted. Are members therefore content with the proposal for the SR? Yep. Okay. Item 11 is SL1, the Prohibition of U-Turns, Belfast Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2026. At page 330, we have the clerk's memo. At page 332, we have the SL1. At page 335, we have the notice of intention. At page 336, we have the draft order, the SR. And at page 38, we have the map. The purpose of the proposed SR is to prohibit vehicles proceeding in a northerly direction along College Avenue, Belfast, from making a U-turn at its junction with Castle Street. The proposed rule is not subject to Assembly procedure. The committee noted receipt of the SL1 and the proposed SR at its meeting on the 21st of January 2026, at which point a call for views was published on the Assembly website. The committee's call for views closed on the 3rd of February 2026 and received no responses. No specific issues have been identified with the SR. Are members therefore content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Content.
Brilliant. Item 12 is SL1, the St Andrews Square West Belfast Stopping Up Order, Northern Ireland 2026. At page 340 we have the clerk's memo. At page 342 we have the St Andrews Square Order. At page 345 we have the notice of intention. At page 346 we have the explanatory memorandum. At page 348 we have the draft order for the SR, and at page 350 we have the maps. The purpose of the proposed SR is to stop up a length of St Andrews Square West, Belfast, to vehicular traffic at a line 32 metres south of St Andrews Square North for a distance of 10.35 metres in an easterly direction. The proposed SR is subject to negative resolution procedure before the Assembly. The committee noted receipt of the SL1 and the proposed statutory rule at its meeting on the 21st of January 2026, at which point a call for views was published on the Assembly website. The committee's call for views closed on the 3rd of February 2026 and received no responses. No specific issues have been identified with the statutory rule as drafted. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Okay, at item 13 is the forward work programme. That is at page 352 if members want to go to it, and you will see it there. And our members agreed to continue with the forward work programme as drafted. Okay. At item 14 is AOB. If members have any AOB they want to flag up. Okay. And item 15 is date, time and location of next meeting. I just need to seek agreement for the next meeting to take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 25th of February 2026 in room 29 Parliament Buildings. Great. Okay. Before we go offline and finish, just we had some chat, and we can maybe continue this offline. We did have some chat regarding the Minister coming next week at 10 o'clock, n'est-ce pas?
It will be 10 o'clock. If members are content that we start the meeting with the Minister, because she has to leave promptly at 11:30, so we'll conduct other committee business after the Minister has departed.
So we have committee in reverse. So if members are content, what we will do is start our meeting with the Minister at 10 and run through all the way to 11:30, and then we will take committee business after that. Are members just content with that change? So we keep everything right? Yep. Okay, that's fine. In that case, I think I can adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for watching.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.